None of this external stuff matters if you don't love yourself.
Mm.
My journey was a long, drawn out one, even to explain it, because the wealth came last. It was years of letting go of things that I thought I was that I wasn't, forgiving myself, and accessing once all of it falls away, like realizing I don't need to become anything. It was a journey of letting go, coming back to what you already were. The wealth can only come in when you're ready for it. Really, the actual gem is the embodiment. The wealth is just a scorecard. That wasn't able to come through until I actually came to a knowing of like, none of that exists outside of me. It's not a becoming. But I think that's the highest wish that I would have for anyone listening today. It's about your journey and your guidance and your own remembering.
That's it. Oh, so beautifully said. That's the word that kept coming through as you were saying. It's not about the becoming, it's the letting go. And I was like, yeah, it's a deep remembrance. Hey there, and welcome back to Fire and Soul, the space to deepen your divine alignment and further activate your awakening. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. I have been waiting to have this conversation around conscious wealth creation and investing in disruptive innovations like technologies. And I needed the most embodied guest to cover this topic and leave it to no other than Jeremy Griff, also known as J Griff, all over the internet. Many of you are already familiar with the podcast that he co-hosts with Aaron Apke called the Great Awakening Podcast, as well as his own podcast called the Conscious Wealth Podcast. Me and probably like you have been following his work for quite a while now, and I'm learning so much. And yet it is a lot, right? And so I wanted him to come on and share his wisdom from the place that he does, which is just total embodiment, and give us an introductory and the lay of the land, if you will, of what he's constantly talking about with so much passion in his soul around this once in a lifetime opportunity to create generational wealth. It's here, it's happening, it's now. And so, because it's such a big topic and it can be confusing and overwhelming, and we've all heard stories of people getting burned and all of that, I wanted someone to come on who could really speak to it from a lot of different perspectives, but most importantly, from the spiritual lens, the conscious space. And that is exactly what today's conversation is. There's a through line of understanding the energetics around self-love and self-trust that leads to the embodiment of conscious wealth creation. It's that energy that fuels those types of outcomes that are available to us. We've all heard the phrase seize the moment. This is one of those moments that I feel we need to allow to seize us. So will we allow it to do so? Jeremy Griff is a conscious entrepreneur, investor of disruptive innovations and technologies. He's the creator and founder of the Level Up Collective, as well as the Conscious Wealth brand. Now, before you just log off and you're like, there's no way I have time for a 2 hour, 45-minute podcast. What are you doing, Michelle? This is so atypical, and that's how important it is, according to me in my heart, that this information gets shared and not be diluted, not be diminished. It's not one of those clickbait, short-term audio type things. This is worthy of our time, worthy of our focus, worthy of our attention. It will pay dividends. And what I'm talking about really is the essence and energetic of true wealth. And that, my friends, is what is woven throughout this entire conversation. I am so honored and humbled to bring it to you in its full, raw, beautiful form. So, without further ado, please enjoy this incredible conversation that I hope you chunk it down and just take your time with. And maybe don't do it all at once, but come back to it and definitely finish. The juiciest parts are at the end. Here's my conversation with J Griff on self love, self trust, and the embodiment of conscious wealth creation. J Griff, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Fire and Soul.
I really appreciate you having me, sister. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. I feel very blessed by your time. And so we have so many places that we can go. We were talking about that before I hit record. And I really want this just to be organic and natural. And for my listeners who also heard in the intro, this is an introductory for us just to scan out as we continue to awaken to the deeper dimensions of all of life. And be at ease with it, right? We're just learning. It's information coming in and we're awakening to it. And we are completely capable of processing, and whatever lands today will land in the way that it's meant to. But we're gonna cover some really fun ground that I've never covered on the show. 6.5 years later, I feel so deeply honored that you so embodied in conscious wealth creation and yeah, all the things that we're going to cover today. So, where would you like to begin? Of just, I know it's a loaded, very open, general question, but whatever is juicy and alive in you to share a little of your backstory and how you came into this space.
Okay. Let me try to condense this.
I know.
All right. So, I was raised in the church, strict Christian, and I've had a personal relationship with the creator since I was about 6, was the first age I recall having experiential knowing of that area, even though I didn't have the tools and the vocabulary to know what that was. And as I grew older, I, like many of us, was polarized by a lot of the things that I saw in the church, as well as, with my parents. I could summarize it as just lack of embodiment. And, so I went polar opposite. And as I went to college, I went as far away from San Diego, which is where I live, as I could get. So I ended up going to Sonoma State, which was like the furthest college I got accepted to. And I went there, and I'm 20 years old, and I end up getting arrested. I was living the opposite of the Christian lifestyle at that time, in my rebellious phase, right? The fuck the system phase and all that. And so me and my friends were drinking. They had decided that I was the one to go to our dealer's house to pick up cocaine in the old life that I used to live. And so I did so. On my way back, ended up getting arrested. And so I don't have any recollection of this. I woke up in jail the next morning, and I was really confused. I didn't know why I was there. I didn't remember. I thought it was kind of a nightmare, So I have to call my mom from like 700 miles away. And, I was always kind of I was the good kid as far as they were concerned. My sister was more bold and whatever. I was more sneaky. And so having to tell her that was quite literally heartbreaking, and asking her to bail me out. And meanwhile, she's thinking that, her son is making all these positive changes and, college is helping him and blah, blah, blah. So I'm skipping a lot of steps here, but I feel like just for time purposes, we're going to start with me getting arrested. So up until that time, I had been, doing all the things. I had crashed multiple cars. I should have already been dead. I really just I think was angry at God and just didn't understand yet. I didn't understand what life was. I didn't know why I was here. Some of these existential questions that maybe most people don't think about when they're that age, but they bothered me. And so I just did all the drugs, all the things, all the drinking. And that night when, I got arrested and I woke up in jail the next day, I ended up changing my lifestyle. Now, I was somewhat forced to change my lifestyle at first because as a result of me getting arrested, I got put on a random, basically like a drug rehabilitation program, as well as a mandatory AA classes and random blood alcohol tests. So every morning for 6 months, I had to call this hotline to find out if I'm going to be randomly asked to come in and pee in a cup and get tested and such, while someone stares at you, by the way. So Yeah, yeah.
A different kind of urine therapy.
So couldn't do anything even if I wanted to, right? And at that time I lived in a frat house. I was the only one who didn't pledge this frat because I just didn't understand that concept, but I digress. So I'm living this certain lifestyle, right? And all of a sudden now I'm in this frat house, but I'm not drinking, I'm not smoking, I'm not doing anything. I decided to make some positive changes. And so I started to get really into fitness. And on the weekends, when my roommates would throw ragers, I would go to the gym for like 3 hours. And I got into like meal prepping and supplements and tracking macros and researching and cooking for myself, which is pretty rare in college.
Or at
Just
all.
all these positive changes. And it didn't take long before I, started feeling like a completely different person, and other people started noticing this as well. And so that ended up, to fast forward a little bit more, that ended up being the thing that got me out of the rat race. I was studying business. I was going to go into marketing. Realistically, I chose the degree that I thought would make me the most money, which was business, right? I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to go into a cubicle. And so when I graduated, I moved back in with my mom, and I went through what I refer to as my eat shit phase, which is just like sucking it up, humbling your ego, right? Because no one wants to move back in with their mom, and living below my means immensely so that I could build up, hopefully, a thriving business. And so that was my first business, probably 22-ish when I graduated college, somewhere around there, 21, 22.
What was your first business?
Personal training and online coaching. So started with personal training, quickly realized I'm still trading my time for money. It's not scalable. I don't want to live under these fluorescent lights all day. So shifting more to online coaching. And at that time, Instagram was very new. There was like 10 online coaches that were like doing well. Yeah. Like it was the Wild West.
Yeah.
And, so I was like, that's my dream. That's what I want to do. And so I pursued it, and I built it up for multiple years to a full-time client load where I'm damn near working what a 9-to-5er would work and making a solid income, but definitely not, wealthy by any means. And I was just kind of like, I'm about 23, 24 at the time. And I just start going through my kind of second spiritual awakening. And I basically just come on Instagram one day and I just announced that like once everyone's package runs out, like I'm not going to be renewing it and I'm not taking on any new clients. And I basically just folded my business, just burned it down, and got really into Joe Dispenza at that time. This is 2017, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, and then started going through his other books. 2 to 3 times a day, meditating, specifically like the manifestation type stuff, and just trying to rewire, a lot of these things that I felt were limiting me. I was being called to serve in a deeper capacity. This is going to be a little bit long-winded of an answer, but it's probably important. I'll share the trajectory.
No, please, because I've devoured every one of your videos, I think, on both your YouTube channels, and I haven't heard this. So
okay, cool. Yeah. So I'm sharing it because like when you're truly of service and you're walking the spiritual path, like you can't possibly imagine what you're actually might be called to do in the future. Right. So like my identity was like, I'm a personal trainer, I'm a bodybuilder. And then all of a sudden it's like death, rebirth. And then
my will versus thy will. There it is.
Yeah.
For real.
I'm 24-ish at the time. And I start going into that. And then 9 months of, no business, just letting it go, and then pop out the other side. And I'm like, I launched my next business, which I referred to as Mind, Body, Soul mentorship. And this was back when this was pretty early to be doing that. Especially if you looked how I looked with the fitness following. I'm talking about trauma and the subconscious mind and somatics and just limiting beliefs and, these types of things. Whereas before it was like, people were like, I want fat loss, I want muscle gain. It was just very surface level, and it started to just kill me inside. Yes. So that was my next business. And I would summarize that by just, if I had to give the elevator pitch of what I did, I helped people through their dark night. Most of my students were like they watched my transformation and they were like, I resonate with everything that you're sharing. I feel like I'm in that death process, but I don't know where to kind of go from here type thing. So I did that for a number of years. That was extremely meaningful and impactful work for me.
Mm.
It also immensely helped me with the embodiment aspects because, as you know, when you're teaching anything in that realm, which you do, you're not actually going to be able to create the change you want if you're not embodied.
100%.
And you're also not going to be able to attract the type of clientele you want if you're not embodied. So it's like this beautiful flywheel where it's like, if you didn't already have the motivation, now you have the motivation to like really walk the walk, even when no one's looking.
Especially.
And so that really helped me for multiple years, just grow immensely spiritually.
Yeah.
And then after a few years of doing that, I started having clients pop out the other side. And we'll probably talk about this a bit later in our conversation of like, there's levels to awakening, right? We were talking before we hit record. And so it's like, I would, start working with someone and they would be like working a 9 to 5 and they're in a relationship they don't like and they don't like their job. And they're like, I don't know why I'm here. And there's just all these things. And they're starting to become aware and they're like, feel depressed. I don't know what the hell's going on. And then they pop out the other side and they're like, experiencing what alignment actually is and starting to feel like peace and starting to like manifest these things. And like, what the hell is this? So usually the natural segue from there is like, I can't work a job anymore. I can't have the old friends I used to have anymore. I can't be with this partner. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. Like everything starts to fall away. Right. And so you can resist that or not, but it's only a few more steps before you go like, you start looking at your relationship to how you earn money in the world. And you start to realize like, it's been my relationship to it. My whole life has been, it's a means to an end. I'm being called for reestablishing my relationship with money and creating a more of a relationship of reciprocity, an energetic where it's like, I'm serving out of overflow. And the natural byproduct of that is being compensated with monetary abundance. And so I actually had a client like kind of low key force me to like mentor her on the business side. She's like, I see what you've built. I see what you're doing. This is a very unique business. You're not building a laundromat. This isn't a taco truck. This is a unique approach. And she wanted to do something similar. And so I was like, I don't know. I had a lot of resistance to it. I'm like, I'm not a business, like back to the identity stuff, right? Before I was like, I'm a bodybuilder. And then now it's like, I'm not a business coach. Like, I'm not one of those gurus. I don't want to do that. And so it was like, okay. And I tried it and like, I loved it because I don't know. I've always just been, and maybe this was the early foreshadowing of what I do now. I just always loved the game. I see it all as a video game and I'm just like, it's fun to me. Yeah. I like the numbers aspect to a degree. I'm not one of those accountant types, but I like the numbers aspect. I like looking for patterns, pattern recognition. I don't know. I just feel like everything about it is gamified, right? Strategy, marketing. It's just fun to me. And so, before you know it, I launched my third business, which was called the Aligned Entrepreneur. And just like the name sounds, it sounds exactly like very similar to what you're doing, but I was doing in my own way and you're doing it in your own way. But the idea was like, you don't have to have this like team no sleep grind mentality. Like it was much more focused on let's get you into actual alignment. Like, why are you here? What are you a one of one in? And let's build a business around that.
Beautiful. And when was like
this? Business through service. This was 2018.
So that was really early. Because now, like everyone is talking about it, but very few are actually embodied in it, and we can know the difference without judgment, total compassion, and empathy. However, early, okay, business through service,
yes, one of the gifts that God has gifted me with is I seem to be like have an eye for innovation. Like I do things early. Not super early. Like sometimes I look at people who invested in Bitcoin 2013. I'm like, I'm a little jealous, but tends to be that type of thing. And then I get bored and then I move on type thing. Yeah. So that was what I did for multiple years. And I also, by the way, this wasn't a tear it down and then do my third thing. This was a now I have two things. So
Right.
like starting to get in more than the direction of building an actual business with like different legs and different verticals,
Mhm.
slightly different avatars and such. So I'm doing that. Those were both like my first multiple six-figure businesses each, which was a lot of abundance for me at that time. I was in like my mid-20s, still living with my mom for a period of that time. And so this was like, life changing. And it's funny because none of that started to flow in until I actually started serving the creator and serving like why I was here rather than like the thing in my mind of like, I'm going to be this, which was a lot of force and a lot of resistance.
Mm.
So that was a beautiful arc, but it kind of got me to this point where I had a decision to make. I I didn't feel an integrity charging above a certain amount
Mhm.
per client, right? I'm sure you can relate. It's like the
Yep.
constant wrestling of like party wants to give it away for free. I've heard you talk about that. Parties like know your worth. This is like the most powerful medicine. And so it's like, sometimes where do you go with that? But I knew like I didn't, I wasn't trying to be charging people Tony Robbins prices or whatever just to have this transformation. I wanted to get it in the hands of more people, but there was when you do one-on-one, there's only so much scale.
Right.
And so I felt like more and more as I worked with like now over that time from like starting at 20, helping people for free, then 22 legit, then 24. Then, so like I had done enough iterations of this to where I'd worked with hundreds and hundreds of people. I started to get to the point where I'm like, okay, I have like a real gift for this. Like I can help pretty much any type of person. I understand archetypes and all these different things. And so I wanted to start serving in a more scalable way, but I had a lot of like limiting beliefs and fears around being seen and the
Mm.
criticism and the judgment and a lot of the things that also that you talked about in your recent live. Like I'm I've never I don't like the aspects of social media that are just like competing based on like validation and like using scarcity and urgency and manipulation and these types of things. I had a lot of resistance to it, but exactly like you talked about, but it's like, but I have an immensely clear and unwavering knowing of what I'm here to do. So it's like, where do I go
Therein
with
lies a
that?
dilemma. Come
Yeah.
on.
So this is pre the J Griff brand, pre Conscious Wealth podcast.
Mm.
Um, Late 2019, I
Mm.
I start working with a world-renowned hypnotist, and I was specifically working on. I felt like I had this glass ceiling. I had gotten to like multiple six figures, and I could tell I was just
Mhm.
like bumping up against that. Like I was limiting myself. I was no longer in the area in the phase of my life where like my external circumstances weren't giving me uh, opportunities reflected back. It was like I could tell it was me.
Mhm.
So we start doing a few sessions, and within a few sessions, I started having insane like meditations and downloads and just looking at things differently. And I'm meditating one day, and I just have the words "level up collective" come in, and I don't know like what that is. I don't know, I don't know.
Mm.
And basically, it just comes as like I'm usually a visual person, but it just comes as a knowing. There's not like it's not like I saw the Level Up Collective logo or something. It was just that, and I didn't really have context of what it was. So I start sitting with it more, and basically, like I'm kind of getting told that like I'm supposed to create a group, and like that's all that was shared with me. And so I go on Instagram like literally I think that day or the next day, and I do. This was back when like polls were pretty big on the stories and stuff. I used to do a lot of like market research polls and stuff. So I just kind of poll my audience of like if I started, a group, and it would be a culmination of like all the things I've learned because I've done a lot of stuff, right? There's like the health and fitness piece, there's the wellness piece, there's the healing piece, like the limiting belief piece, there's the business piece. I mean, that's a lot of what makes life. Those are a lot of the quality of life markers. I'll put it that way. So long story short, I get a good amount of interest in that just because of all the goodwill I had built in one-on-one over the years and giving a lot of free value on social. And then within 3 weeks, it's launched. And I think we did like 50 people out our launch. Now, keep in mind, we started the LUC. It was a $97 offer.
Whoa.
I didn't know what I was.
You didn't know what you had yet. Yeah.
I didn't know what it was. It had nothing to do with wealth or money.
Yep.
It was all the things I was into, like I said, from past iterations. And so anyone who had worked with me in the past, I had always strived to underpromise and overdeliver. And I also undercharged and overdelivered. Yep. So that builds goodwill over time, right? So I had like 50 eager people that were like me. I'm like going to be like locked into this. It's a steal type thing. And at that time, my mindset was like, okay, these are like Bonnie and Clyde are my one-on-one offers. And then this is just going to be like either like the feeder offer or the graduation offer that can be like recurring income over time.
Right.
And this was launched in February 2020.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you start to understand, like, I didn't come up with this. I didn't understand what I was creating. And it was like 3 weeks before the world shut down.
Yep.
Yeah. So obviously that was the best thing that could have happened because we had our sense of community and connection taken away. And people started to, really seek out online communities and stuff like that. And so.
And people wanted to learn. They wanted to learn something new in that time, right? It was just, that was what I was experiencing.
Online education was
right. Big. Exactly. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the hybrid of online education, but also like you can't go hang out with your friends. And so like online communities seem to be like the secret sauce there. So I'd say for the first half of 2020, we weren't teaching wealth at all. Now, for context here, as I kind of land this plane of this long story, you have to understand that like the world at this time I had never once spoken about investing on my Instagram. And so maybe this is valuable for your audience and the women that you work with, because I've heard you talk about repeatedly, like, we have these stories and they might prevent us from showing up on social, or like maybe we do show up, but we show up with a mask because there's fears and blah, blah, blah. And how will I be perceived? Identity is a blessing and a curse, right? It works for us. It works against us. At the end of the day, it's a mask. It might help you get to a certain level, but then you're going to have to take it off, burn it down, and do it again if you play that game. Right. And so it's like I had worn all these different identities, right? It's like I'm a fitness guy. Okay, cool. I'm super spiritual. Let me get my beads, and then I don't resonate, and then let me start acting like I have money, and then like all the iterations. And so I had a lot of resistance, right? It was like my students, they know me as like this, but they know me as this, and then my audience knows me as this, and it's like, who am I to like teach this stuff? But what's interesting is in the background, I mean, I had been obsessed with like business and even the 1%. Like I used to read like biographies and autobiographies of like super successful people. I don't even think I was into it for money at that time. I was just like always fascinated by like what separates them, like what's different about them. So I had been studying on my own since I was like, I mean, obviously in college I was doing that, but like I wouldn't consider college a real education. I would say like actually like on my own, like personal development, self-development. Since I was 20 when I got into personal development, because I started with a multi-level marketing company that introduced me to like, the Think and Grow Rich and the Zig Ziglar and the Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins and Robert Kiyosaki, and all that at age 20 changed my life. Yep. So I was into this I'm about 27, 28 at this time, 7 or 8 years, but the world knew me as like a fitness guy or a spiritual guy or whatever. Right. Yeah. And so that was a hard like transition for me. And it would have never happened if I didn't just like surrender and trust God. Because I had all of the resistance in the world to like, I don't want to be that. I don't like these wealth gurus. I don't want to try to act like I'm this thing or whatever. And so what ended up happening is there's this $97 a month group, and it's basically just like a culmination of all the things that I had taught in the past. And one day, we were doing like, I think monthly deep dive calls at that time. And I was also putting out curriculum. Pretty ridiculous for $97 if you
Yeah,
ask
I
me.
was like, what curriculum?
There was like so much to it. Yeah, yeah.
Getting access, but that's that whole thing that drives us to over deliver and not really be in balance with our worth yet. But like we learn as we go.
Yeah, for sure.
Been there, done that.
So I did like polls inside our community, and I was like, what do you, for this next month? Like I came up with the idea of doing themes because it was a bit all over the place. So like for a month, we focus on one thing. And I kind of polled them like, what would you want the next theme to be? And it was like, like lifestyle, fitness, biohacking, like different things, healing, or like money and investing. And like 94% put money in investing. And I was like, what the fuck? They're saying that to someone who they don't know is even versed in money and investing. I hope that makes sense. Like we talk about, you wouldn't want to learn from someone who doesn't have what you want in life. And it's like, well, they didn't know what I knew, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I'm going to offer something else. They knew before you knew. They sensed, right? Because your energy, you have presented king energy long before anyone at your age should be king energy, right? So, and that presence and that confidence and that embodiment of your transformation that is so incredibly rare for anyone, much less that age, they felt, so they just trusted you. That's what I'm picking up very clearly. And by the way, what was the makeup to men or women in your group at that time?
Good question. Honestly, I want to say slightly more. It was close to 50-50.
Awesome. So ladies are listening. Okay, beautiful.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Keep in mind, like the original 50, that's like, it's really hard to get a group offering to your first 50. That's to me was like my main focus. A lot of them, like I said, were clients from my past. And in general, like there's throughout my career that men have too much ego. They don't want to hire another masculine man to tell them what to do. Right. Whereas women are a little bit more, now I'm speaking super generalization, don't cancel me, tend to be a bit better at surrendering and being like, hey, I need help. Whereas for a man, like sometimes it takes a man to get into a very dark place to be like, I need help. And then even when they do that, they might go to a woman, not another man, because there's just shame culture or whatever it is, right? These all of that weird threads of masculinity that aren't actually masculinity that we've all been taught. So anyway, so it was fairly even. So yeah, so at that time, I'm just like, what? It was kind of crazy. Now I had been getting into like options trading and like credit card stacking and manufactured spending. I don't know if you know what these things are, but like it was a wild time during COVID. Like I was learning a lot of stuff and everyone was online and people were starting to look for alternative sources of income. And so I've been laying it out the way I've been laying out just because it was like, it was a perfect storm. And like, I didn't do any of this. It was just like delivered to me. Like one of my favorite stories from the biblical teachings is the story of Noah. And I often describe what my journey has been like, extremely similar to Noah. Like he was building this ark for hundreds of years. They used to live like insane times back then, or like insane lengths back then. And he was being like made fun of and outcasted that whole time. And then one day it starts raining. And it hasn't rained for like hundreds of years. And before you know it, there's a flood that, ends up wiping pretty much all of humanity out, minus the few of them on the boat. And to me, that is a story of unwavering belief.
Yep.
And in what cannot be seen. And the biggest challenge of the human experience is that you're constantly, because we were given five senses, like we're constantly pulled back into the world of the seen. And it's so easy to fall back asleep to thinking that this is realer than what's internal, and what's felt.
Yes.
And so my journey of like entrepreneurship and how I got here and how I've been blessed with like the platform and ultimately attracting amazing humans like Aaron that have, become business partners, and
Aaron
hundreds
Apke.
and hundreds of like my dream students that I used to journal about, like 2017, 2018, 2019. Like I have so many journal entries. I've done a whole masterclass on it that's in the LUC of like showing them my whole journey of like about actually behind the scenes, like the vulnerable things I was journaling and where I was at.
Yeah.
And the only way that all that has happened is because I let like me, the I, die away more and more. Yeah. And I surrendered more and more to like what was coming through for me. And so there were so many of these crossroads, right? Like most people wouldn't have torn down their successful fitness business when they didn't have a replacement or a plan B, and then just spent 9 months in lotus positions. Then once they finally redid it again, most people wouldn't have just like gotten this word and then 3 weeks later launched it. And then once that was already launched, when I start getting like shown that our students want to learn investing and stuff, a lot of people would have sat in their shit of like, no, but I'm not that.
Right.
And like, I'm this. And it's like, no. So it's just that continual
awakening and letting go. Whew.
Yeah. I view it almost like a muscle, because it does get a bit easier the more you use it, but it's just like that. Can you learn to like ride the wave and like be less rigid with it? So start teaching. At first, it was just like I did a masterclass on credit card stacking, and like, which is basically, I mean, it's funny because that was the early days of like what we now teach, but I didn't realize that. This was just a one-off class, and I was basically teaching on how you can get approved for a bunch of different 0% credit cards, and then use the various points and what's the word? Like the initial offers that they give you, and you can make like thousands of dollars, like for doing literally nothing. And then the next iteration of that started teaching how you can like pull money off of 0% credit cards. Cause like I had been reading like Robert Kiyosaki and all these things since I was like 20, and all he talks about, I don't know if you've read his books, but like, it's just like the wealthy don't save their money and use it to invest. They use other people's money. And that was like drilled into me. And so I was like, all right, real estate. And then I was like, it never resonated with me. I'm like, I don't want to do real estate. It's not what I'm here to do. Very clear. So then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute. Why can't we apply that same principle, but to the things that I'm actually like really good at and already obsessed with, which is like innovation and technology and eventually cryptocurrency and these types of things. And so it was like, okay, so we started teaching like, well, why can't we do that? So pulling money off of, let's say 0% credit cards, you have like 15 months before there's any interest occurring on that, investing that in the right investment. Now, look, this is not financial advice. I'm not telling anyone to do this. But theoretically, this is what I did. And it worked out very, very well for me. So in March, when the market bottomed, this is March 2020, the COVID crash. I had been saving cash for like 5 years of like, as I was scaling and all that. I wasn't like, I didn't reward myself hardly at all. I'm not saying that's healthy. I'm just was like that. And I was waiting for this moment. And when that happened, I not only deployed all of my cash into largely Tesla, but the right few investments at the bottom of the market, but I also like maxed out multiple credit cards. So this isn't just something that like now we teach and it's like, it sounds good. It's like, I was able to 7x my net worth in a year.
Wow.
While most people are getting wiped out.
That's right.
And that was when, after that year, all the teaching stuff aside, like I could continue to walk through like the iteration of how it was like became this thing. But really that was it. That was the tidal wave where I was like, oh shit. And it kind of crystallized things for me because I had to learn this experientially. That ushered me into like not needing to worry about money.
Yeah.
Like, unless I really fucked up at that time, I was good.
Wow. What a relief.
Never needed to re-enter the like, oh, got to get back to it type energy.
Yeah.
The snowball was big enough at that time.
And
Now,
amazing that you knew it, because most would be like, it needs to be bigger. So you had
yes.
come to a place in your consciousness, right? In your connection to God of like, when is knowing that like, I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Like, and yeah. So just want to point that out because that's big, especially for a man your age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a
Mhm.
good point to point out. That now that I'm thinking about it, so I had been doing many years of releasing the toxic masculine programming that I had received. So
Yes.
that whole like, just like I am enough, this is enough, you know, I have all that I need type energy,
Yes.
many years of that. And
Mm.
so, yeah, when it finally came, it was like a combination of all that work, but it was also like, that's where the investing stuff comes in really handy because it's like I had built legitimate skill sets to where like maybe your average person they don't know exactly, well, how much money do I need? Like most people don't know. They just throw out a number like, oh, I want 5 million.
Hmm.
I'd be cool with 3 million. I want 10 million. Like, but when you dig into it, they don't really know like, well, how long will that last them and what's the math behind it, right? So for me, it was also largely helpful because like the skill sets that I had built, like mathematically speaking, I would have to really fuck up in order for that to ever not be enough.
Yeah.
But regardless, the funny thing is that that's how I was feeling after the 2020 wave of abundance, and in reality, that was just the beginning. Because a lot more wealth was about to come in, but that
A
wasn't
lot
my
more.
intention. Yeah, that wasn't my intention. That was actually me thinking like, okay, I'm good now. Let me get even like the clearest and the cleanest I've ever been on like I will no longer do anything for money. And I
Mm.
actually went through this like 6 month period where I was like, I stopped working. Me and Jax had just moved in. We moved in during COVID.
Jax is your wife. Let's give her a shout out.
Yes,
I
Jax is
love
my now
Jax.
wife. So first time, um, and she has a son as well. It was like a big transition, right? Like a lot of people broke up during COVID. We moved in together during COVID. And so it's this tidal wave of abundance. And one day I just checked my portfolio value and I'm just like when it hits you of like, I don't ever need to worry about money again. I had to really like take some time off to sit with that, right? Because the worst thing
I'm
I could do is
feeling
just,
that. Whew.
yeah, the
Yeah.
worst thing I could do is just like glance over that and be like, yay, celebrating me. Like, let's go do XYZ and then move on. It's like, no, like how many lifetimes have I like
Mm.
went through what I went through just to enter this one to
Mm.
finally reconcile all of that karma, make it, I don't know if you want to think of it as making it worth it or just like, but it's certainly a signal like this is the lifetime to do that
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me. And
Yes.
for a lot of people,
Yes.
that's not the case, right? So this is something that I took, you know, treated as essentially sacred. So
Yeah.
I canceled, I mean, I just canceled my life for a few months. We used to live right across the street from this like big park that was like one of those low key parks that people don't know about. Oh, it was the best.
I love
It would
those.
just be old people and me.
I
And
love them. Yeah.
yeah, because it was like somewhat near like a hospital retirement home thing.
Mm.
And so I used to just like microdose and go over there or not and just go over there, whatever it would be. But I spent a lot of time at that park just trying to like ground it in. And my focus for multiple months, and this is an interesting thing to talk about, especially for people who haven't yet reached that I never need to worry about money level. And I don't give it a number because there shouldn't be a number, right? It should be reverse engineered based on like, you know, your lifestyle and your goals and, you know, all that. But societally, we think that when we reach that number, there's going to be this like, and like a deep, probably like a peace or maybe like satisfaction, or maybe you'll finally love yourself or like whatever. I guess it's different shades for different people. When I reached that, I had my biggest dark night yet.
Hmm.
And
Ooh.
I like to talk about this because no one warned me. I'd never heard someone talk about this. I had only heard it glamorized as like, just wait till you get here. Like, you're going to feel amazing. And it's like, I did not. So what happened was, and maybe this is the caveat is like, if you're conscious and then you reach that, maybe is the difference.
Fair.
So what happened is I started looking at my relationship to money and all the things that I had done and was doing for money. And I don't know how this is going to come out, so I'll just trust that it's going to come out in the right way.
Cool.
Essentially, I started looking around my life, my friends, my family, everyone that I knew, everything around me, all these structures. And I started realizing like every single one of them is doing what they're doing in some way for money, but no one will admit it. No one will address the elephant in the room. And I reached a point. Oh, yeah, before I go into that, and I looked at the mirror too. I looked at myself and I'm like, I've been serving like in a deeply spiritual and of service way for like, let's call it 3 years now at that time. And yet there was still the subtle thread there. And this is where you start to get into the weeds of being a spiritual entrepreneur. Cause it's like, well, there's nothing wrong with value exchange and the energetics of reciprocity, right? It is literally a law of the universe, but there was something more there for me. It was like I wasn't willing to admit to myself yet that a lot of what I was doing wouldn't have been done with the same vigor or motivation if money didn't exist.
Yeah.
And that was like a somewhat of a shattering shadow realization, because as some people might listen and be like, yeah, what's the problem with that? But like, I guess I hadn't accepted that about myself. I thought I was only pure. And it was like, no, I was as pure as I could be, but there was still this, but I need this. I'll help you, but I need this.
We call that the spiritual ego that hijacks best intentions.
And so, I just started like, it was a like multiple month disintegration process of, truly journaling out questions like, okay, the construct of money doesn't exist. What are you doing with your time? How are you serving other people? And these types of things. And so it was an interesting season. And ultimately that kind of froggered me into my next season, which was coming across very randomly through like Aubrey Marcus's page in the comments, some shamans that did ketamine and MDMA deep tissue, like somatic release work. So like, it's like biostimulation. They have like electricity attached to it going through their hands. And it's generally too painful to have sober. So they generally give you MDMA as well as ketamine to help with heart opening, as well as like relaxing into it and a little bit of dissociation from your body so that they can really get in there. I've done a lot of psychedelics. I've done a lot of different compounds. I don't know if it's my soul or this is my ego, but I've always liked exploring realms of consciousness, all types of different altered states of consciousness. This was the most potent experience I've ever had. When I tell people about it, it sounds like, oh, okay, so like you're going to a rave. Like, no, no, this was like how people describe DMT, but for like 3 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like, it's not how it sounds. So it's hard to put into words. But anyway,
Yeah.
I came back. You know that scene from The Matrix where Neo's in the pod and he like pulls it out and then he's just like looking at himself with all the goop or whatever?
Yep.
That was what I was like afterwards when they were like, all right, brother, like we're complete. Like, take your time. And I'm like, they sit me up and I'm butt ass naked and I'm like looking at my body
Mm.
and I'm like, who is this? Like, what is this? And I had to like relearn to walk. I had to like, it was that level. Like my soul was gone for 3 hours and then I had to come back in.
Yeah.
It was the most intense shit. So I'm just going to, we'll move on from that. But after that, that's 2021. That was when, that was a ceremony that led me into sovereignty and the podcast. So like everything about my life changed after that. Now it was like 6 months of, I mean, it was like a year of integration, but the first 3 months I couldn't be on technology and stuff.
Yeah.
And I didn't have like an eye construct. It was like my personality was like a distant memory. It was like that potent. I had to reintegrate into society. But slowly I started to come back, if you want to call that I don't know. But then all these beautiful things started to happen because I went from like, oh, I'm going to sell my Maserati. This money's gross. Like, why was I pursuing these things?
Yep.
To like, oh, okay. It doesn't really have to do with the thing. It's my relationship to the thing.
Yes.
Selling all of this, that's not actually, it's bypassing the lesson, right?
Yeah.
So I started to get all this wisdom for, that multiple month period. And all of a sudden I stumble across the realm of trust law teachings that I had been looking for. My soul knew this stuff existed. I had been putting it out there, but I hadn't come across what I knew was possible in a way that I also knew was for me. I come across that. All of a sudden I start seeing this stuff about debt discharge. There's other aspects. I come across someone who was actually teaching it from what I felt like was a place of love. And I just started taking notes all day, every day, because I still wasn't ready to, be fully back in the world. So filled up a whole ass notebook and was just like, this is the next iteration. And at that time, we had been focusing largely on like investing, options, a little bit of crypto, credit, and then all of like the healing and lifestyle stuff in the LUC. In a matter of, 6 months, we launched the Conscious Wealth podcast. And I started figuring out how to integrate some of, the sovereignty stuff into what we were doing. The light bulbs start going crazy when I'm like, hold on, if we can leverage that, invest it, and then discharge it, what? Right. So
double dipping in the best way.
Yeah. So the wheels start turning. I'm like, this is insane. And we were talking before we hit record about it really felt completely pure. The energetics. I mean, the states I was in was like, I could only listen to like Ram Dass and like certain music from our ceremony.
It's like we're soul brother, sister. When I was going through the steepest parts of my awakening, that's all those two. That's it.
Yeah.
It was so nourishing for me to wake up, to reintegrate into society. Mine was very similar to yours. Yeah.
Perfect. So you understand what I'm saying? Yes. I just couldn't relate to almost anything else. And so, levels of consciousness wise, I'm not going to give it a number. That's would be very egoic, but felt like, okay, this is a very high level of consciousness. And that was the place that sovereignty came through. That's what's so interesting about that is like, I'm sure in a few years in retrospect, I'll have even more clarity than I have now of like, what was that? Like, is there still like karma that needs to get like acted out and burned away, even when you are in those states? Or like, is it that you can feel like you're completely in a place of non-ego and yet it can still commit? Like, I don't know. I don't know what that was, but all I can say is it felt like the most aligned thing. This was all delivered to me on a platter. Yeah. And also, a side note, I had been into conspiracies since I was 16. I was telling my mom about 9/11, showing her documentaries, telling her about the Clintons. I mean, this is back when I was just smoking weed all day in high school. And she was like, okay, Jeremy.
Yeah, right.
And now she sends me stuff and knows all about that stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I digress. So I had been into that for, let's say, almost, 13 years at that time. And so this was just natural. All of a sudden I'm learning about the United States corporation. It just felt like the deeper level, but it was pretty natural. I already understood how to research and all these things. So the segue was unbelievably like natural. And all of a sudden when I start teaching this, I mean, I don't remember the exact members we were at, but we definitely weren't charging $97 anymore. Let's say we were at $497 or something like that, around $400 or $500. We went from something like 75 members to like 100
per month, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was like, wait a second, 497, because I know what your rates are now, but that makes sense. Okay, monthly.
Oh, yeah. So back then we used to do per month. Like most people just wanted to do per month.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, we were doing like, let's just say 500 per person. And let's say we were around like 7,500 people. And then it jumps to like 150, 175 or something like that. This all of a sudden the sovereignty thing is like, people are very hungry for that. Right. And there was a lot of lessons that came from that season as we were talking about, but like in general, it was a season for us. Yeah. Now there are things that have lasted, but the majority of it, it's like the 80-20 rule. 80% of it, no. Caused some further, I shouldn't even say caused. I think it was just some further things I had to work out in my own evolution. And so we've kind of like evolved past that, but I guess I'm sharing this as we kind of wrap up the arc is like, well, there's been many takeaways, but just in the recent things that I was sharing, there's been so many like iterations and so many things that have been brought through. And it's really been a process of like, okay, I'm not the one who's deciding what comes through. My job is to be as clean and clear of a vessel as possible. Yes. And to distort what's trying to come through as little as possible. Meaning sometimes we tap into something completely pure, but then our ego comes in and then we deliver it in a way that's maybe 97% pure. And that's fucking hard. That's a work in progress always. But in all the things that were brought through since creating the LUC, we're now like 4 years in. It's been a process of like just surrendering and letting it come through. And then some things stick and a lot of things don't. And so it's like, we started at $97 a month and we didn't really have like long-term packages or any sort of like standards or minimum commitments. And so, you get a lot of like flaky people and you get people that you're having to like play mommy and daddy and motivator and like, it's just weird energetics. Right. And so eventually like, okay, I need to raise my rates and we need to create more boundaries and structure and expectations and standards. And then, we enter the sovereignty phase and it's like, you got a lot of people who are gung ho. I mean, they're studying 8 hours a day on their own. They're handwriting affidavits and doing, teaching themselves UCC code and shit like that. But at the same time,
Mm.
when we interact with them in Slack, they're disrespecting my team members. They're so angry at the system that they won't hesitate to point that at you if you don't give them the short-term answer that they want.
Right.
Another weird shadowy thing is like when you go to teach this stuff, it's like, if you think about what you're actually teaching, you're teaching someone how to have power to where they transcend the statutory law.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you teach someone to have that level of power, but they don't have the heart or the discernment that you have, that has allowed you to earn being able to be embodied in those areas,
mm-hmm.
they're quick to try to wield that power.
Right.
If you get what I'm saying.
I totally get it.
It's something that I think about sometimes, because it's like, if this is really true, like when you're newer to that stuff, you're like, can this be fucking possible? Like all these laws, they're not real. This doesn't apply to me. It's like, and then you start to go into the biblical stuff. You start to realize like, well, shit, like the laws were really made for the masses.
Mm-hmm.
Because the masses are in such a lower level of consciousness that they need fear and control constructs, or else things probably would be a little gnarly out there. Mm-hmm. We do need laws. This is where maybe I'm a contrarian to the contrarian group. I think we do need laws. I think we do need police. I think that when David Hawkins calibrates the average consciousness of the average person on the planet, it's fucking low, really low.
Yeah.
And that kind of person, you can't just say, if there's no law and order, that would be an interesting area. And so the way that I view the sovereignty stuff is like, that has to be spiritually earned.
I agree.
And if you're not in a high enough, and this is weird for me to even say, because it's like, who are you to tout? Who are you to say who's in high enough? It's not for me to say. I'm just saying I've seen in my own journey, and as a teacher and as a student on all areas, that like, if you're not in a high enough level of consciousness to where you're operating at least from like neutrality or above, then you're actually just trying to take.
Right.
You're trying to get something for free.
Right.
You're operating selfishly and convincing yourself, like probably the emotion was probably greed
or revenge
or resentment or control.
Yes.
It's shadowy for sure. It's
very shadowy. Yes.
And yet we have this spiritual space that is now there was like a spiritual space, and then there was like the fringe space, and now there's this new subspace that's like the spiritual sovereignty people. That was like who we were really attracting, and a lot of our students are pretty much, all 225-ish of our students. That's the type of how I would describe them. But at the same time, it's a small percentage of us that understand what I just shared and are operating from that kind of place. And so when we were doing that as a business, yes, the business took off. And if we were just pursuing financials, then, we would continue to do that. But it only took a few experiences with, people threatening my team or just absolutely flipping out. And you got to realize these are the same people that when you click on their profile, they're drinking their urine, they're fruitarian, they're, 20-day fasts, they changed their name to Ajna, like this level of person. And yet you tell them one thing.
Presenting as that. Yes, so there's that.
You tell them one thing that they don't like, they turn into the most toxic person that you've ever seen. And so it was like, it made me sad It made me, makes you feel misunderstood, makes you feel,
especially
why
for
am I
a guy
doing
who
this?
over delivers, right? Like, are
Yes,
you
yes,
kidding me right now? Do
yes,
you
because the
know?
accusations are like, you're trying to steal my money. And even if it's not expressly stated, it's the energetics of it is as if it's like, I paid you and now you're not making good. And it's like, this is education. I worked with 12 mentors. Do you know how many of their processes worked for me? 2.
Yeah, that you're fortunate.
I didn't freak out and say, give me my fucking money back. I'm, that's the nature of the space. And so it's just, it didn't take much for me to realize like, okay, I think my soul needed to learn this experientially, but like, it's not number one, like I'm not here to fight. There's nothing to fight. That if you have that in you, I would encourage you to explore that.
Beautifully said.
I've sat with that a lot because I had so much of that in me in this lifetime. I mean, it was, first it was like the church, and then it was my teachers and the principal, and then it was the system, and there was cops, and it's just been all the things,
the
government.
The world.
And it's like, okay. There's deeper levels there. I'm fighting myself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so how can I teach sovereignty when I'm teaching, even if I'm not teaching it from that place anymore, which I was able to evolve out of? It was like, okay, I'm teaching from this totally centered place. And it's like, but the people I'm teaching to are like, yeah, okay, cool. We get it. Just give me the stuff so I can go fight them. And it's like, I'm charging that out in the collective. Like I'm giving energy to that, to this army that wants to do that. Yeah. And it was like, I can't do this. So against our profitability and growth, we just stopped speaking to that. I deleted certain posts, certain podcasts, just a little bit of a rebrand. And we started going for more of the wealth aspects. One last thing I'll say on the sovereignty stuff that I can't believe I totally forgot to bring up. Another crazy thing is that the space as a whole, we all say that this is, we're doing this for like freedom, and a big aspect of that is financial. And yet the people teaching this stuff are not typically anywhere near financially free. And also the people learning this stuff, in our direct experience of working with hundreds of them, there's something weird there where there's a declaration that this is all about freedom and wealth, but they actually step over dollars to pick up pennies.
Yeah.
Constantly. Yeah. And I'll give you some examples. You can spend 3 to 6 months, and in that time, you could have acquired $100,000 in funding and the knowledge to know what to invest that in, to in the next, let's say, 12 months, completely pay back the $100,000 in debt, plus make yourself another $100,000 scot-free. But we would have people who would be completely uninterested in learning actual timeless wealth skills, the type of thing you teach your kids and they teach their kids, the type of thing that the 1% instill in their families, understanding credit and funding and relationships and investing and asset allocation and, innovation and these types of things, trends. They just want to study United States code. They just want to read the Constitution. And it was kind of crazy to me. So that was when I realized, okay, we're not, there's a misalignment between my core values and my greatest gifts and who we've been serving. So we went through a hard pivot. That was probably 2022, rebranded more into the wealth stuff. You know, I had a few videos go really viral. That's another unfortunate thing where it's like, you know, our content team is like, well, why don't we just double down on what's worked? And it's like,
Ooh,
no, I'm
yeah,
not playing that game.
Yeah.
I'm not playing that fucking game where you build yourself into a box, right? You keep going viral because you give them what they want, but it's not who you are. It's like, I'm not doing that. So we did like the whole etymology video. I don't know if you ever saw that one.
I did not.
That has like 400,000 views. Grew the shit out of our channel. That's on YouTube.
Yeah.
We had a few other ones where I'm teaching on, you know, just like sovereignty types, and it goes viral. But it's like, I can't actually help these people.
Yeah. Right.
And so I had to shift away from that. And so now we focus a lot more on wealth creation, which for some reason, and I'm sure Jack's probably talked with you about this, the way she describes this is beautiful. People will sometimes come on a calls and they're like, yeah, but I want to do the debt discharge and I want to focus on this. And she's like, look, you can do that, but that's playing defense. We teach to play offense.
That's what she said.
The wealthy aren't playing defense. It's not to say you shouldn't have defensive moves in your strategy, but you don't go from, you know, middle class to wealthy playing defense, right? Defense is more something you maybe think about once you're already wealthy, right? Like trust and asset protection and understanding the legal side. So we kind of restructured things, and it's much more of a focus now on wealth creation, because most people are, let's say, at the 6-figure, if they're lucky, 7-figure level of net worth. And with the cost of life right now, we calculate people's financial freedom level, which we refer to as their walkaway number, as 20 times your life expenses. So if you figure, okay, well, not going crazy, but to live an enjoyable, comfortable life above where I'm at now, let's say I want to spend $25,000 a month. Okay. Now this is different if you have like family and stuff like that, right? But like for one person, that's a pretty nice life. Okay. So $20,000 a month times 12 months, that's $240K a year, times 20 years, that's 4.8 million. So that's what I mean by the practicality of like, okay, that's a lot more tangible. Now let's work backwards and actually develop a, you know, like A to Z strategy that maps to that with like timelines and risk tolerances and, you know, that type of thing. And so it's been a lot of mistakes to get here. It's been a lot of, and here, right? That's not, there is no Mount Olympus. I'm just saying to get to the present season that we're at, where it's like Jax on an almost daily basis comes off her calls and she's just like, I love my job. And I'm like, why do you call it a job? But anyway, she always calls it a job. She's like, I love my job. Like we're getting the best people. Like I only talk to the best people. Like no one gets on the phone with me and isn't fucking dope. That's awesome. That's a huge compliment, right? First off, that feels great.
Yeah.
But also it's like, thank you.
Yes.
And also it just speaks to like, once again, I had to surrender the whole sovereignty thing, right? And it really felt like, I mean, that was why Aaron connected with me. That was the only reason he followed me and we collabed at first. There was so much external validation. The amount of people who would say like, I've learned from all the OGs, you know, like the Santos Bonaccis and the Jordan Maxwells and the Cal Washingtons and the more OG types, and no one breaks it down like just that aspect where it's like you can really let that take you over.
Yeah.
But it wasn't right for my heart. And ultimately it's like, I don't know. The more I sat with it, it was just like, I'm not here to teach law. It's like, that's such an important piece, but I'm more of like one of those, I don't know the Gene Keys framework, but I use other frameworks, but
so good.
I'm one of those like very multifaceted connector types.
Yep.
Like I'm a patterns guy. I can talk about broad, I'm into a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
And so it felt like I was kind of trying to, this is going to be the thing. And it's
Mhm.
like, no, it was just a season, just like fitness was a season, just like helping people with deep healing was a season. And now in a funny way, all of that is kind of encapsulated in the LUC, but it's a lot more fluid
Let
because
me
this awakening process it's a holistic process, right?
Yes.
So many aspects to it. I'm gonna
So
stop
many
talking.
aspects. That was so beautifully put. And I just feel like we were really served up a deep platter of who you've become along your journey that really speaks to where you are now. And I want to also just clarify in case anyone's curious, because we have Brother Truth on the show. We have Brendan Joe Williams coming up soon. I think I'm recording with him next week. Some other sort of characters known in the space of the sovereignty space. And want to clarify, and I think I understood you to be correct. You did the sovereignty stuff that you felt called to do in a way that worked for you and your family. You just no longer feel called to teach it, right? For all the reasons that you shared. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So to make it a little bit more clear, when I was talking about kind of the like a lot of things have come through in the last 4 years, we've taught a lot of different
Yep.
things, front facing and back facing. And it's kind of like the 80-20, 20% ends up sticking. So
Yeah.
with the sovereignty stuff, what we found to be the kind of like most efficient and realistic, where it's like a lot of people, they get into sovereignty and they don't really know when you ask them like, okay, what exactly do you want to achieve? They just say like freedom. And it's like, all right, well, what does
Status
that mean to you?
correction. Status correction.
Yeah. So like they'll just say like, oh yeah, I'm here to access my Sesquiv. Oh yeah, I want to do 1099s. Oh, I wanted to get a free. They don't, but it's like, why? And you eventually arrive at an understanding of like, they don't know what they want. They
Right.
saw this video and it had that conspiracy music in the background that all the TikTok videos have that goes dun dun dun. And they're like, oh shit. And then they look it up and they're like, I got $100 million bond on my name. I'm going to go access that. And it's just like,
Mhm.
that's what I'm talking about, where it's like, we might look back on this time period and be like, that was a fucking psyop to keep us distracted as shit. Cause it's going to take 10 years and you're never even going to access it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
My thing is just like, I'm not saying that I know, Brandon, we're peers. We follow each other. I know Brother Truth, we're peers, same thing. It's no shade against the sovereignty space
Of
or
course.
anyone teaching in it.
Of course.
I've collaborated with these people. They've both reshared my work before. I respect what they do. I've taken Brandon's Contract Killer email course. I recommend it to a number of people.
He's redoing it right
Um,
now too, by the way, the
yeah,
2.0 version. It's going to be so good. Yeah.
yeah. So my thoughts are just like discernment. Discernment is really important, right? So
Mhm.
like there's aspects that anyone I've ever learned from
Mhm.
in the space where I'm like, okay, I like that. I'm gonna take that piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I might discard 80% of it. Some people will learn from a teacher and they'll just use all of it. For me, I had to ask myself the question, okay, what do I actually want? Like
Mhm.
what did I want out of sovereignty? It was like, okay, well, the taxes piece is absolutely criminal.
Yep.
And it was like, okay, that was the probably number one. And
Mhm.
then it was like, outside of that was the spiritual, the energetic of like, if you, for your audience that's familiar with like cord cutting, or it's like, how much energetic spiritual cords do we have that are depleting us, like as if you had like leeches all over your body, just
Yep.
sucking your blood, right? So it was like,
Mhm.
well, that's a big fucking deal to me too. So it's like, all right, let's rescind voting, let's rescind revocation of election, let's rescind some of these contracts, let's, correct some of these things. That was it for me.
That's my journey. 100%.
That's all that matters to me. And so
Same.
we actually even we have an offer that would be considered a sovereignty offer. You'll just never hear about it publicly. We don't even offer it publicly. It's only for our LUC students. And that is helping people transition to the private side.
Yes.
And I won't go too much into that because I
I
like to
love the name
respect
of it, by the way. Can we say the name of it?
Sure, yeah, we can say the name
The
of it.
Self-Trust Academy.
Self-trust, because that's
Best name
all that this
ever.
journey is about. That's all
Yeah.
that this journey is about. And sometimes people come into our work, and part of the reason we named it that is because they'll go through it and they'll be like, this seems too simple.
Yep.
And I'm like, exactly.
And it's lawful and legal. Why isn't everyone doing it? Because they don't trust themselves.
Exactly. So that every single question, like you were talking about FAQs earlier in a different sense, but like our FAQs in this arena is just like, how is this possible? How do more people not know about this if this is true? Why don't the billionaires do this? It's like the same type of things. And it's just like every single question is like fear, self-doubt, lack of self-trust. It's like we named it self-trust because it's a spiritual journey. And once again, back to the levels of consciousness. If you were to be calibrating at a certain level and you receive this information, it would be an instant knowing.
Totally.
There's no resistance.
Yeah.
It is only like when you're so in the world that, and then you're busy and you're distracted and you're doing all these things. And then you try to take it in and you're like, this can't be possible. And it's like, so we're very like, we're not scaling that offer. You won't hear about it publicly. Like that's a sacred offer. And that's another thing I learned. I thought, oh, okay, everyone, like, who's your ideal client? Everyone who doesn't want. No. This is very sacred work. And I'm not like, I respect the hell out of my man, the pickle man, for like putting that out. To same with Brother Truth. Like they're basically like mass marketing sovereignty stuff. You got to be a special person to do that.
I would say that
the amount of projections, the amount of people don't want to take accountability. They want to put it on you. I hired you. It's your fault. And it's just like, I see why Brandon made his thing free, right? So no one can do that. And he literally will be like, fuck off. Like,
oh yeah.
yourself or whatever. He does all this is not
your brand. You could never do it.
Which is very triggering to some people. That's not my style. I appreciate his humor though. But so just to wrap it up, the wealth creation aspect is the offense. When I was talking about that, we focus heavily on, okay, how do we help people go from 6 figures to multiple 7 or low 7 to 8 and reach that walkaway number, which is different for everyone.
Yep.
And then from there, it's like, well, one of your biggest expenses along that journey is going to be how much you're going to pay in taxes.
Right.
And so if we can't either mitigate or eliminate capital gains as well as income tax, your journey might take 5, 10, 15 years longer. And we actually mathematically calculate that for people so that they can see option A, this is how that might look. B, this is how that might look. C, this is how that might look. And then usually they're like, okay, that's a no-brainer type thing. But it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone.
I wanted to share about that. And by the way, thank you for that beautiful sharing of your heart. I don't know even how much time you had today, and this might go down, it seems, as probably the longest podcast we've offered, but it feels so relevant because we are on average like an hour 15 here, but I'm so excited about this because I've wanted to go into longer form audio. With someone where we're having a real connection, we're really offering up some beautiful wisdom. You're dropping just such sovereignty, honestly, embodied sovereignty. And I know our listeners and viewers can catch what you're really dropping. And so that feels so beautiful because I think there is going to be a bit of a rush, to say the least, of the masses to just run into that space and not be as connected and conscious to what they're really doing it for, what do you want from it, and or just having that discernment. So honestly, it's such a beautiful cautionary tale from a place of learned it, saw that it was like this golden carrot, like dangling of like, you could totally bank on this in this space, but
infinite money.
Right. But at what emotional tax? And so I'll share with you, and this actually has just come to me in the past few days. I thought one of the main reasons I was moving to, if not the main reason I was moving to Austin after a 3-year call on my heart of leaving Southern California, was to learn the sovereignty space so that I would then be able to teach it to the women that I have the honor to work with. And I had dropped many seeds over the past few months in groups or private, coaching, and just been like, hey, if you want an additional resource, happy to share. And not a single person said, yeah, please send me anything. So should have actually picked something up then. But then I knew I was bringing on embodied guest in this space and all of that. And I just thought, well, they'll come and I got to go first. And so I get here, I get invited through our friend Erin into the Dream Law study space, the group that's going to meet in a private residence with the who's who of people I've been following, right? And trust on a lot of levels who've opened my eyes and hearts to so many of the stages of awakening. And I got invited, and that felt very natural, actually. However, then it got really real for me of getting to get present to the energetics. And I've worked so hard the past 3 years to be in complete divine integrity with the awakening that I had gone through and continue to go through. And it's incredibly sacred. And also, I predominantly now reside in a very joyous, light-filled energetic. And it's also very powerful, and it magnetizes my dream clients and customers. And so I'm finally, for the first time in my life, this last year, I'm just like, it's a dream, my life. My business is thriving. My clients are dreamy. Like everything feels so good. And so that energetic took earning, right? Deep devotion, being at my sacred altar, facing the shadows, all of that. And it feels good to know how much I've earned this, right? And yet, did I? Because it's also available, just the flow of it all, the sacred reciprocity. And so over the weekend, I was in a plant medicine journey with my teachers that are based here in Austin, and a very clear knowing, the only insight that came through. Otherwise, I was just in this relational field of giving, receiving all the love. It was such a beautiful healing for me to welcome me into the Austin area. But the one download that came through was, you're not going to teach this. You need to learn it, do it for yourself. But that energetic is so heavy, and it's loaded, it's dark, it's masculine. And you're not that. You don't learn in that way anymore. That's an old identity. It's an old frequency. You don't have to learn that way. You learn through grace and ease and joy. And it was just such a knowing. It was like, thank you. And my friend had dropped the seed. We were getting some pedicures and manicures before the evening, and she dropped it. And it was like, she's very wise. She'd flown in for the journey space with me. And it was just like, God, why is what you just said ringing true? I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that into the medicine space, right? And I just didn't know if it would come in, but I'm getting the chills because I just feel so grateful to be so guided and to listen and to know what's mine, what's not, what's ego, what's spiritual ego, what's truth. Like, that takes time and practice and devotion. So I just want you to know that as you shared your full story, it just feels so special, because all of that brought you to this moment where you're now helping 200 plus people really walk into a frequency that was always there. But how do we attune to that? How do we level up within ourselves frequentially, spiritually, all of those things, to then learn about the things that we're going to now dovetail into, which is where I thought we would start more so. But that backstory is so needed, because just like you, if there's anything that I'm devoted to, it's the embodiment of the transformation. And I get really passionate and really activated when I talk about this, because the wild, wild west of spiritual coaching and conscious wealth teaching and all that, where's the bar for that, right? Where's the barometer? And when you know yourself, you can know others. But a lot of people don't know themselves. And so they're looking for anyone to teach them. And so if there's anything that I can offer right now to our ladies and maybe a few men who are listening and watching, it's like, please continue to do the deep inner work so that you know yourself, you trust yourself to be able to discern with an awareness that would give you a knowing of, this person is for me in this season on my path. Yeah. And so that's where we are right now. And so for those who are feeling the call to not allow crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain, all the other things, right, to be confusing and overwhelming and fear-based, it's because you don't know yourself yet, right? And you don't trust yourself yet. So that, I think, is the ultimate invitation here as we now move into kind of scanning out to what's really happening with the big banks, big government, our money, the future, the fourth turning that I know you're so passionate about talking about. What does that even mean? So I'm going to just hand it back to you because you teach this. You know that we need to talk to each other in this space like we're five, just for learning purposes. We're smart, we're conscious, we're wide awake and aware. But how do we now move into just having this as our awareness, moving slowly, cautiously, mindfully into the arena of there's a real opportunity here. It's not just about the money. Let's be clear. This is about a whole other frequency that is our birthright.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful intro. Or segue, I should say. Okay. So let's journey back to the 1910s.
Okay.
World War I, coming out of the aftermath of World War I. The Ford Model T is yet to be created. The Roaring Twenties is yet to occur. Up until that time, your notion of, or not your notion, your subjective reality of what the world was like and what was possible was limited to what you could see in front of you.
Yeah.
And that was largely horse-drawn carriages. That was not even radio yet. That was living in very spread out, non-urban areas. There was so many aspects of society that were normalized up until that point. And then the Roaring Twenties happen, and you have this blast off of innovation, kicked off largely, at least he gets the credit usually, by Henry Ford. And it wasn't that a car had never been created before. It was that no one had cracked the code of how to scale it, how to mass produce it at a price point that everyone could have access to. I mean, most middle class. And so he creates this. What was more important than the car was the ability to create the assembly line and to be able to actually mass produce them to where you could achieve what's called economies of scale, which drive prices down so that you can charge what you charge. And we see that today with, for example, Teslas. You used to have to be kind of rich to afford a Tesla. Now you're pissed if you bought a Tesla because 2 years later, the price on a new Tesla is so much cheaper than you bought it for. That's one example of the deflationary nature of technology. Technology solves problems and raises the quality of life. At least it's supposed to. So in a generalistic sense, it is supposed to increase the average quality of life for the average person, because over time, technology's prices get driven down. And at that same time, the capability of the technology typically doubles about every 18 months. This is commonly encapsulated in something called Moore's Law or Metcalfe's Law, the nature of, the progression of semiconductor chips or just technology in general. Another easy example is like televisions, right? Or like cell phones, like the first cell phones, the clunky things where you had to pull up the ear and talk, like long before flip phones or anything like that, were like $3,000. Now, back in the 80s, think about what $3,000 was. I mean, no one's buying that shit, right? And then fast forward just 10 years and it's maybe $300. Right. Now, of course, now we have advanced iPhones and they charge a good amount. But my point is, like, over time, technology is deflationary.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important because we live in a world where our monetary system, our money, is inflationary. And you can argue different, you can propose different solutions to this, but one core premise of our investing thesis at a more macro level of where we're at in the timeline of humanity right now is that our currency, which started in 1913 and went off the gold standard in 1933 with the signing of House Joint Resolution Act 192, has been devalued about 33 times. So a dollar used to carry the purchasing power of $33 now, right? And so because of that, if you were investing between 1933 and now, it doesn't matter if you put your money in real estate or stocks or whatever it was, you saw an unheard of appreciation on your money because the currency, the denominator, right? Let's go back, guys, to maybe elementary or middle school where they were teaching us like 2/4, and we had to work with numerators and denominators, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the numerator of an asset remains the same, let's say it's 2, and the denominator is normally 1, which would be the dollar, right? Because it's denominated in dollars. And we change that denominator to 0.5. The top doesn't change, but now that equals 4 instead of 2. Mm-hmm. That is what you see when you look at the appreciation of the real estate market. That is what you see when you look at the performance of the S&P over the last 100 years. Real nominal, like adjusted for inflation returns have actually been sideways for a long time. Technology is our best chance at out innovating corruption because we're pegged to a fiat dollar, meaning a paper dollar that has no intrinsic value because, once again, it was taken off the gold standard in 1933. So one way in which I look at this, and I'm just speaking very broadly here, we can like hone in more as we go, but it's just for people to understand that, number one, if you aren't invested in anything, then you're just playing the fiat game. And the fiat game means that $10,000 in savings today is going to be $8,000 in savings in 2 years, and is going to be $5,000 of savings in a decade, and so on and so forth. So you definitely don't want to play that game. But then there's like, okay, the real estate game, or all right, well, I do 401ks and Roth IRAs, and I just have my indexes, or I do bonds. Okay, those are all great, but here's the problem with that. The dollar has already been devalued 33 times. We're at the tail end of the fourth turning that I'm always talking about, which I can get into in a second, but we've got 3 to 8 years left before they can't devalue our currency anymore. Like if I were showing you a chart, it's the opposite of what you would see if you were looking for a growth asset, right? Going from the bottom left up to the top right. It's going down and down and down and down. We don't have much room before this whole Ponzi scheme of inflate the currency by printing a bunch of money, then raise rates to kill the middle class. Then once shit breaks and we enter a recession or depression, inflate the currency again and lower the rates, rinse, repeat. Or, by the way, we're about to have another cycle of that. There's a very limited number of cycles of that remaining. And real estate has appreciated to the point where the ROIs remaining are pegged to the ROIs are pegged to how much more you can devalue the dollar. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't like value over time. Like, let's say if our population were to grow a bunch more, then okay, it would create more demand. But unfortunately, we have a declining population problem. That's a whole other topic. So that's not there.
Go watch the Great Awakening podcast.
Yeah. So that's not there. Check. Okay. Then really we're just playing the currency game. So if they devalue the current, like if they print 40% of our money supply, then your $800,000 house is now going to be worth $1 million.
Right.
Congrats. You didn't do anything.
Right.
But there's limited upside, right? Because it can only go up to the degree that they print. Stocks, et cetera. I mean, I would just encourage people, especially the women who listen to your show, if you guys are invested in more traditional asset classes, try to look up the inflation adjusted return, or the what you could refer to as the real nominal return of some of these things. And if you adjust, for example, if you map out what's called M2, which tracks the liquidity supply over time, how much the money supply has expanded from the Federal Reserve, if you overlay that on a chart with the S&P, they're almost identical. So you're not actually like, you're not some genius investor. The United States market isn't this uber profitable niche investment. We're just devaluing our currency. That number on the top, that 2 that I used in the example, it's still 2.
Right.
The bottom is just like 0.05 now. That's the only difference.
Wow.
So, okay, we get it. What's the alternative? Well, if you remember, I started with talking about deflationary technologies. Deflationary technologies, in my opinion, are the realest chance we have at innovating our way out of the inflationary currency and the way that the economy is set up. So if you were to overlay something like Bitcoin over M2 or the S&P, or something like Tesla or some of these more like innovative AI companies, of course, there's going to be correlation. They're going to go up a lot more when M2 is expanding. They're going to have corrections when M2 is decreasing. That drives the whole economy. But the amount of actual growth created in these vehicles is far exceeding most other traditional asset classes. And that, once again, is because technology has the rare inherent quality to, over time, deliver more value for less at a higher scale. And that's what you could refer to as a byproduct of network effects. The bigger a network gets, the more valuable it becomes. The more valuable it becomes, the cheaper it can offer its services, and yet more profitable. And then the flywheel continues. This is something you only see in technology. And so we don't invest in, oil and gas. I don't invest in, consumer cyclicals like, Target or Walmart.
Is it also
I don't
true
invest in dividend stocks like Warren Buffett. We invest in disruptive innovation, technology, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, things of the future that are within our morals, within my morals, and that's important.
You don't invest in real estate, do you?
No.
Yeah.
No, if you can't tell.
I love it. Okay, so where would that bring us if we're talking to 5-year-olds, including myself, to learn this in a way where I'm like, okay, I understand that. What would be the next thing for me to know about this opportunity that is, I've heard you say it a million times, it's like you can't scream it loud enough from the rooftops, and you truly come from a place of like such heart-based service when you do this, by the way. you're just like, guys, it is right here. It is right here, this opportunity for generational wealth that comes about every 100 years, also known as a turning. So
Yeah.
can we just give some context to what the fourth turning is according to your deep study and research, and then what that opportunity might be that then might dovetail us into kind of getting into maybe some of the details, spoken to a 5-year-old, of investing.
Yep. Yeah. So now that we've laid that out, the fourth turning framework comes from a book that I read. I came across it in 2019, 2020, and it's called The Fourth Turning. Highly recommend it. It's a good audio. You don't have to read it if you don't want. And it's actually pretty short.
Okay.
It is a study of the last, I want to say, 1,000 years of civilization in the first world. And essentially the rise and fall of civilizations, kind of.
Yeah.
So the way that the framework is laid out, the book's called The Fourth Turning because that's when shit gets interesting. But as you mentioned, there are turnings, and then all of them make up what's called, I believe they call it in the book, a saeculum. But I just, I don't usually use that word. It's confusing. So each turning is a 20 to 30 year period. And all together, 1, 2, 3, 4, that makes up an 80 to 120 year cycle. Now, this is where, like, just as the foundation, before you were to ever consider pulling up a chart or trying to watch stocks or even like specific analysis on a company or some of those things that are probably more confusing and daunting to people, I would just encourage people to look into a bit of economic history. Not the shit they try to teach us in school. I hated reading, and I believe that most of that is, Rockefeller propaganda. But
Yes.
I'm talking about real, like what actually happened, and more so studying trends over long term, right? So like things that fascinate me is like stuff that's about the rise and fall of civilizations and like patterns over time, because that informs where we're at right now. And as I'm talking about a lot on the Great Awakening podcast, it's like, I just turned 32. I can be the best, like I can have the craziest intuition and access to like the craziest information, but ultimately, if I try to make investment decisions based on what has happened the last 32 years since I've been alive, then I'm studying the dot-com bubble. I'm studying the great financial crisis in '08, and I'm studying COVID. I only have a sample size of 3 things. That is leaving me open to an immense amount of risk. And that would, if I were to do that, which is what a lot of people do, they just look over their lifetime like, oh, that's not probable. The S&P has averaged 10% the last 100 years. And we say that as if 100 years is a long time.
Right.
But then on the other hand, some people try to say that whatever a human is has been around for 1,000,000 years. You think 100 years is a long time. So that's part of the problem, right? So, and then people my generation and my age like think that 32 is old or is a long time. And it's like, that's a blink of a fucking eye.
Yes.
So I try to look from a very, very zoomed out perspective, and I try to study hundreds and hundreds, if not, like if I can get 1,000 plus, I mean, that's even better, right? Larger sample size. And, it's not like I'm sitting there with some fucking encyclopedia or something. I'm just learning from experts who have done this, right? Because they had to devote their whole life to write this one book. And that's part of the value of books. And this is part of how humanity has gotten to the point where we can even create AI, because the aggregation of books compounds knowledge. Yes. So with the fourth turning, what they found is that there are patterns that repeat almost with a 100% certainty rate. of first turning, second turning, third turning, fourth turning. And they map them out into 20 to 30 year intervals. And basically, the last 100-ish years, I forget the exact number of how far back their study went, but it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. There has never not been a time that the fourth turning does not end in the 80 to 120 year window.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we just have to look at the question of, okay, well, according to their frameworks, what kicks off a first turning? And in order to answer that question, we have to go back to the fourth turning. So what ends a fourth turning is usually either revolution, war. Now that can be civil war or world war, some sort of overthrowing of power. Like it could be overthrowing a dictator or anything like that, or like a massive catastrophe. Like, for example, COVID could have been that, like a health crisis or something that like, it has to be like of that magnitude, or it can of course be unity, as I talked about in our recent thing, but least likely scenario.
Yeah.
At least if we're studying the past. Now, the future doesn't always have to predict, or the future doesn't always have to map to the past, but it certainly predicts it fairly well.
Yeah.
So, okay, so if that's what ends a fourth turning, okay, then we go back and we're like, okay, so when was the last time that that happened? And the authors break this down. They show you like for the hundreds and hundreds of years, exactly what event shifted each mathematic, like on everything. And so what that was for us was the signing of the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II in 1945. So World War II ended in 1944, and the US won. And so, you know, NATO and some of the powers and all that sat around and, you know, signed some things. And the Bretton Woods Agreement was, you know, around that time where it's like, okay, the United States is going to be the world's reserve currency. And, you know, we're going to have this little NATO alliance thing, and you're going to get this, and we're going to get this, and you're going to have this, and just hashing things out after a war, which is basically what happens, right? Because all wars are really just over money and the aggregation of wealth and power. So that happened in 1945. Now, if you add 80 to 1945, what do you get? You get 2025. So that would be next year. Now, that is the most common range. It is much more typically closer to 80 than it is closer to 100 or above.
And we can feel it anyway.
And you can feel it. So the math, like just off of what I've covered off of that, sounds kind of arbitrary of like, okay, so it's just like this historical statistical likelihood. It's like, no, the whole book is really a book of psychology and sentiment, which is why it fascinates me. I've always been fascinated by like, well, firstly, my own like wiring and my own psychology and my own evolution. And then you play that out on the grand scale, and it's like, whoa, we're all connected. And there's like these ebbs and flows, but wait, they're not random. They repeat. Oh shit. So there's actually a statistical likelihood that in a certain turning, a certain president will get elected. Right. And you can show me that the last hundreds of years. Okay, interesting. So it starts to inform your perspective of the world, which is really important if you're going to be investing millions of dollars. You know, like BlackRock and Vanguard and Fidelity. If you think that they're just trading based on an idea or a hypothesis, you know, you're misinformed. So it's about finding an edge, right? Especially if you're going to invest actual sums of money. Most people don't invest because they're overwhelmed. They don't have the clarity and the certainty that they would need, right? So they just say, oh, I don't understand it, or, oh, my friend lost a lot of money on it, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
That's why I imagine you're asking me about these frameworks, because I would be like that too, right? I would not be able to have invested in the amount that I have invested currently in cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, and various disruptive innovation companies. Now, if I didn't have these frameworks to make sense of the world, And there's only so much sense that you can make when you're investing in a very early idea, right? It's not like you're investing in Pepsi, where you can look at 50 years of financials. You can study everything about it. But that's also why you would be stoked at a 5% per year return on Pepsi because the growth has already occurred.
Right.
You're investing in a behemoth, monolithic company that is allergic to innovation. The complete other side of the spectrum is where we invest in. These are early ideas, similar to being like a VC, like venture capital, early ideas where you have to be an accredited investor, except I talked about on the Great Awakening podcast, like cryptocurrency is now giving that opportunity to people because it's unregulated. And that's part of why the SEC was so, tried to resist it for so long, because they really care about protecting investors. But in reality, it's just like, there's a lot of fucking money to be made, and we need to get in there first type thing. So when you're investing in innovation, you don't have 50 years to study. You're investing in something that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And so going back to like when I explained my whole trajectory, I didn't realize it, but like God was preparing me for this the whole time.
Yeah.
Because that whole thing about how like I would do things early and then they would become mainstream and then I'm over it. That is exactly the skill set that you need to see what the world is going to look like in 5 years. For example, I started investing in AI in 2020. It wasn't, now there's definitely earlier people. Like if you had like a tech career, you understand coding, or you had a friend tell you about Bitcoin in 2013 or something. I'm not acting like I was like super, super early, but no one was talking about AI. I was teaching master classes on what the world was going to look like.
Wow.
I was talking about self-driving cars. I was talking about autonomous ride hailing, Tesla taking out Uber and Lyft, which is yet to happen. Stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to look 5, 10, 15 years in the future. And that's a challenging skill set. So how do I do that? Well, because I study history.
Yes.
And so remember when I was talking about the Roaring 20s? Well, while we've never seen sentient artificial intelligence before, we've never seen deep fakes where you're watching a video and you're like, this didn't actually happen and I can't tell.
Yep.
That's fucking crazy. And that's a reality in the next 6 months. I mean,
we're already there. We just don't know
this
it.
last week, which the AI and the pictures and the videos that it's showing, you cannot tell. And it's 4K quality. It's flawless. Wow. That only scales more and more and more, right? It's exponential. So while we've never had that before, if you study periods of past innovation, I want you to think about any of these iterations. So we were so married to the printing press, right? The creation of the printing press exponentially skyrocketed humanity's evolution because of what I was talking about with the aggregation of knowledge. If you can take all of your lineages, earned wisdom, and you can put it down on paper, and someone can live for 80 years and write me 100 pages, and I can download that and I can read that in 3 days and learn what it took them 80 years to learn. Now compound that across all that leveled us the fuck up. But then one day the printing press becomes outdated. Yeah. And the radio's created. Right. And then we get married to the radio, right? You're able to transmit information across these wires and it goes out everywhere. And then the black and white television is created. And so it's never the same. Like the next thing isn't going to be the printing press or the radio. Right now it's AI. Right now it's cryptocurrency and a digital monetary system. But it actually is the same. Right. So you can go study how did people react when that was proposed? Right. How long did it take to gain actual adoption? What was the year-over-year growth rates of these things when they were adopted? I mean, so what seems like wow, Jeremy, you have these wild theories. I'm actually like really risk averse and pretty logical about this stuff. I have, I guess, information that other people aren't looking for, but it's there. It's free. There's nothing. I mean, a few things I access are behind paywalls, but in general, it's free.
Yeah.
Most of these frameworks I talk about, like the fourth turning, like population decline, demographic shifts, understanding the like cycles of innovation and stuff, that's all free. And that's 90% of all you need to understand.
Wow.
Then you can get into the weeds, right? You could talk about, you know, charting and some of the more advanced ways to analyze company. But that's, I mean, if you bought Bitcoin when I was yelling from the rooftops and you literally, someone lobotomized you, and in 10 years, they gave you a letter that was like, hey, you actually, bought Bitcoin. Here's your wallet address and everything like that. You'll never need to worry about money again. Off of, let's say you bought 3 to 5 Bitcoin a year ago.
Wow. A year ago
In
is
10
what?
years, you will never need to worry about money again. One
That's how
trade.
strongly you feel.
And,
Can
and
we
you never looked at a chart. Like this is what I'm saying. Like I just love this shit. So it's all the intricacies, but for the people that are overwhelmed and they're like, oh, this sounds like a lot. And even just what he said, it sounds like a lot. It's like, well, I mean, you guys have opinions on, I shouldn't say you guys, but the average person has opinions on the Kardashians.
Mm-hmm.
They could tell me exactly who they think is going to win president. So you're keeping up with culture anyway. You're giving predictions anyway. But then when it comes to this, you're like, oh, that's confusing. Like, I don't understand how you could possibly know what's, and it's like, I feel the same way about people who say XYZ about this pop celebrity or XYZ about this conspiracy or XYZ about this future thing that you don't actually know is going to happen. It's just,
it's a guess. It's a guess at best. And you're going back, at least 1,000 years by reading the Fourth Turning book or listening to it. So how would we summarize for those who are in the little bus of what the fourth turning is potentially, but it seems like it's really here, is for investing, beginning to get curious and start to do some research and invest in crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain. And I get it, there's other disruptive technologies and innovations, and that's what you're really trying to speak to. It's more than just that. But the digital currency thing, I think a lot of people, and I'll speak for my immediate community, the clients, friends, family, I have almost no one in my life that's done any investing there. And yet they may be very wide awake to a lot of the other things that we've been talking about here, the corruptions, the crumbling, all of that. But it feels scary, right? Because all they've ever known in their lifetime, all they can see is that the fiat currency is real, and that's trusted and proven, right? So how does the fourth turning represent an opportunity when it comes to crypto, blockchain, and Bitcoin? And I know you're not giving financial advice, but just from your research and what you share as a teacher in this space. Yeah.
So just to clarify, it's taken like waves to get to this question that you're kind of reiterating, because there's a lot.
I get it. Yes.
There's a lot to lay out there. So hopefully people somewhat understand the whole, 80 to 120 year thing, and then the whole technology thing. Those were pieces. And now I can actually answer.
Articulated that beautifully. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I've been explaining this in the depth I have because it exactly correlates to what we're going through. So when you study the characteristics of fourth turnings, that is typically when you see, I'll just name a few: peak polarization between the left and the right. Check. Inability to agree on basic premises that is required for a democracy. We can't agree on gender right now. We can't agree on quite literally anything, what constitutes a man or a woman. We can't agree on some of these basic things that 10 years ago would have been unfathomable. Check. Wealth inequality, check. Typically, this is when you see the rise of a populist. That was what we saw with 2016 Trump. That is what we're seeing right now in 2024 as well. Check. You also typically see the collapse of the existing, and this is the most important part about the entire framework. The point of the first turning, second turning, third turning, fourth turning is that is one macro system. Mm-hmm. Our system, as we all know it who are listening to this right now, myself included, was created in 1945. The United States was the world's reserve currency. They then abused that privilege. The United States is in decline. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing at the Olympics. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing with our politician choices. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing with our kids. Mm. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing in the education system. That's why we're seeing what we're seeing everywhere. People think it's all doom and gloom. And this is where me and Aaron are totally on the same page versus some of his other friend group. This is nothing new. This is nothing new. This is how Rome fell. This is how a lot of past civilizations fell. You get gluttonous. You get high on your own delusions. Mm-hmm. And our delusion, this cycle, wasn't women. It wasn't power. It wasn't all the nations we had conquered back when that was a big deal of taking other, property and land. It was debt.
Oh, yeah.
We're the world's reserve currency, and we devalued everyone else who we make them denominate their currency in United States dollars. That's why a lot of nations don't like us. That's why Russia doesn't like us. That's why BRICS is formed. So 1945 to now, that's a macro system. Now within that, we had different turnings, right? We had the era of like anti-war, the whole Vietnam era, right? We had the 60s and the 70s, Ram Dass, Timothy Leary, Aldous Huxley with the free love movement, massive consciousness wave, but it was too early. Mm-hmm. And it was also unearned wisdom. Then we swing 80s, 90s. It gets a lot more bureaucratic, a lot more about oil money and power and all these different things. And then we get the tech boom, great financial crisis. And since 2008, that was what the authors indicate the fourth turning started in 2008. Oh, wow. It's not like them hinting at it. They clearly state all of their frameworks. So 2008 is when it started. So you go 20 years from that, that would be 2028. So whether you want to call it 2025, 2028, or 2030 is the big buzzword one because of the WEF and all that. It doesn't really matter even if it's 2032. The point is we're closer than we are far away. Mm-hmm. And you also don't even need to understand like the author's predictions. Just look around.
Yeah.
Right. And everyone understands that when they look around. The difference between what I'm saying and what most people are saying is that there's zero pessimism in this. This is like, you should be fucking stoked you're alive right now.
Yes.
Like your parents didn't have this opportunity. Your grandparents didn't have this opportunity. Yes, like our generation has to be a bit tougher because if you're coming of age during a fourth turning, it creates what's called the hero archetype. It shapes you to your core because you're going through things that the last era that had to go through that was the silent generation. And they were called the silent generation for a reason. They were the kids of the parents going through the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And so you learned like, shut up, don't complain about how hungry you are, like help your family. And that shaped them. And then they reproduced and had children. Imagine how they parented their children. Imagine how much fear and scarcity and like that constant looming thing of like, I grew up in that. Right. What if we go back to that? Right. That shaped them. And then their kids experienced that. Right. And then they're like, fuck that. Like, I want to become the opposite of that. Right. And then they eventually reproduce and that this is what fascinates me. Mm-hmm. It's like all part of the human story, but meshed in somehow with economic opportunity. That's my That's my sweet spot. So it's just like fun to learn and think about. But with where we're at and this unique opportunity specifically to crypto that you asked about, you have all of the writing on the wall with that checklist that we went through. And then you have the 80 to 120 year cycle, whether it's showing us 2025, 2028, 2030, doesn't really matter. And then you look at what the Fed keeps doing. In 2020, they printed 40% of our money supply. Now, I think we topped out in the sevens interest rates, which for this kind of economy it can't handle that. You saw what happened. And then we're headed back down. We just got an inflation print yesterday. They're manipulated, but it read in at 2.9%, which is the lowest it's been in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Ding, ding, ding. Meanwhile, unemployment just creeped up. There's a few recession indicators flashing, like the yield curve just uninverted and some of these macro things. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. Then these are all justifications for them to print again. Like you've heard of, I always butcher the first one, but it's like Hegelian dialect.
Mm-hmm.
So like they have to wait for something to break and then they go, we'll help you.
Right.
Here's a stimulus, right? So
yes,
the next one, watch unemployment. It has been creeping back up. And then we also had that whole Japanese yen sell-off, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into all these confusing things for your audience, but basically the writing is on the wall for them to print again. And as I said, there's only so many print cycles that they can get back into. Mm-hmm. And in a fourth turning, you're looking at the collapse of the system. That's not just like saying there's going to be a change of like political powers. No, it's political, it's social, it's economic, it's entertainment, it's education, it's medicine. We're talking about, that's why it's called a turning. I mean, this is like going from, Roman civilization to the Aquarian age. Mm-hmm. It's like a night and day, like the Renaissance happens, like it's a shift in the way that really it's culture. And that's why I love the Great Awakening show, because it's all culture. It's the human story.
Love it.
So for those that are into culture and the human story and the collective's awakening, it's like, if you're going to research these things and be into these things, to me, you might as well also economically prosper from understanding these things, right? So that's where we kind of align, like being aware of what's going on in the world, but not just being one of those doom and gloom truthers. It's like, build the new world.
Yes.
Like put your money where your mouth is. Like, don't just sock it all away in a hidden underground thing and say, fuck your brothers and sisters. Like what, that's not going to get us out of this.
Right.
So that's my whole thing. To make it specific to crypto, one aspect of the shift in systems is monetary system. And we've been operating under the SWIFT banking system for far too long. The SWIFT banking system is why when you go to wire someone money on Friday, they're not going to even see that until maybe Tuesday, and it's going to cost you $30. If I send you Bitcoin right now, you'll have it in your wallet in 15 minutes. And it probably cost me, I don't know, $3. It depends on the amount, but right. So cheaper cost, no issues with weekends, no middleman intermediary. Right. It is the difference between a centralized economy where everything feeds through the central banks, which drop down and feed their little children, which are the big banks, right? Your Chase, your US Bank, your Wells Fargo. And then all of us come out of them like tentacles, and we have to all feed through them. They're the centralized entity. Yep. So that's what SWIFT represents, is a centralized model of power and control. Right. Right. And we're told that it's for our own good, and it's largely of benefit to us, right? Because, we'll lend to you, which when you start to study sovereignty, that's kind of funny. Yep. And then, we'll give you special promotional offers. We'll store your wealth. We'll do all these different things. We'll offer you promotional products that can make you money. And it's like, you start to learn that none of that is actually in your best interest. And an alternative system is now finally so far along that they weren't able to crush it. It got to kind of that tipping point where once an idea becomes too big, when enough of the collective consciousness agrees on a certain construct, whether or not that thing was real before, now it's real.
Right.
It's just like COVID.
Yep.
It's just like the fiat dollar.
Yes.
These things aren't real, but they are if you say they are.
Right.
Quantum is showing us that, right? Quantum mechanics can now prove that. So it's like, I mean, Bitcoin was real before, but it's just that I watched that phenomena kind of occur the last few years where there was still like the have fun when it goes to zero type sentiment. And it's like, BlackRock is the largest holder of it now. So we went from have fun when it goes to zero, I'll never touch that, to BlackRock's playing the game that they play with real estate now, where you will own nothing and be happy. Right. And they're going to rent to the entire, they're trying to own every house in America and have a monopoly on home ownership.
That's right.
They're playing that same game right now with Bitcoin. So it's actually a race of, are you going to reach the amount of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency you want to have total before BlackRock buys you out?
Before you have to lease what you think is your Bitcoin from BlackRock, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which is pretty much all ownership in the U.S. corporation, but that's another story. Yes.
Yeah, it's another story. That's a whole other 3-hour podcast. So yeah, it's part of what informs me, yelling from the rooftops about the stuff is the fourth turning, but that really is just one framework that I find is helpful and easy for people to wrap their heads around. 80 to 120 years, got it. Started after World War II, got it. Lands us right here. The writing's on the wall with some of these checks. Like, that's pretty basic, but it also, there's many other perspectives and lenses that I'm looking at this through. And every single lens is pointing to the same thing. So I'm also a big fan of Ray Dalio's work, who created from the ground up the largest hedge fund in terms of assets under management, Bridgewater. And he wrote a book called The Changing World Order, where they also studied the rise and fall of civilizations. This is definitely a thing that people who manage a lot of money do, because ultimately at a certain level, you're not managing money, you're managing societal trends.
Yes.
And that's very much so how I look at this. I'm not looking at like, oh, I love that company, or, oh, I love that car, I want to own its stock. Like, no, I'm just like, this is all the human story.
Right.
And if you can get good enough at pattern recognition because you've studied enough of the past, it can inform the future. And that's the main thing that I'm doing. And so earlier I was talking a lot about real estate and the devaluation and the S&P and bonds and some of these outdated vehicles, right? I've done videos recently on the 401k trap. I've also done it recently on why you should fire your financial advisor, and just some of these more outdated approaches.
So good. Yes.
So cryptocurrency is my generation's real estate opportunity.
Yep.
If you bought real estate after, let's say, in the 20s, the 30s, or the 40s, like we've heard these stories. My grandpa bought this house. Actually, I have that story. My grandpa bought his house for around $20,000. We live in San Diego, my friend. You know, the X multiple on his purchase that has been paid off for how many decades?
Right.
That is a generational wealth opportunity. The problem with that, though, is also just that most people were just middle class and they just bought one house. Because back then, and I've done teachings on this, back around 1930, what the average person made in a year and what the average home cost, there was only a discrepancy of about 2 times. So in other words, the average person right now makes about $54,000 in the United States median income, unfortunately.
Mm.
That would mean that the average home price right now is $108,000. I
Not
want you to imagine if that was the median home price. And that's just for the median, right? So if you're making six figures, you could have just paid your house cash.
right.
We live in a world now where the median is $54,000, right around there, like I said. And the median home price, the last I checked at the end of 2023, was around $430,000. So that's over an 8x.
Right.
So it's like things are being slowly siphoned. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that. My point of bringing up the real estate is just that was a real generational wealth opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
For my generation and for us and your listeners today, 2024, looking at, okay, what can I do now to where in 2030, 2040, my family is far more prosperous than today and
Yes.
positioned for what the world's going to look like? Because my friends, it is not going to even be recognizable from what it is right now.
Right.
We're closely reaching the point where we're about to create our first AI that is going to be as smart as the smartest human.
Right.
I would say we're probably 12 to 18 months from that. And the curve from going from as smart as the smartest human to as smart as the entire human race,
right.
One machine.
Wow.
Is because of that Moore's law graph, is only going to be another year or two or whatever it is. We're headed to a world of self-driving cars. You're not going to need stoplights. You'll be able to have your car go out, drop you off in downtown for a night out, drive back home to your garage, and you'll press your app and it will come back and pick you up. Complete cities are going to be redesigned top to bottom because there's no longer going to be a need for parking spaces because there aren't going to be parking spaces out and about. I want you to understand that society as a whole is going to be completely reimagined. AI is going to take 30 to 50% of jobs by 2027, 2028. You start to look like every aspect of society is being reimagined. This isn't just about, oh, I read this book and I'm betting the ranch on it. It's like, no, this is years and years and years of study in different areas, and they're all pointing to the same thing. And so what is the world going to look like when not only can you not even get a job if you don't have a specific skill set, right? Like manual labor, like delivery driver, like accountant, no, goodbye. That's easy to understand. But then we look at the second and third order implications of that. And it's like, how are the 300 million Americans, the average one of them with the average level of consciousness and the average awareness who maybe does watch the news for their information, what the hell are they going to do?
Right.
Then you start to go down, okay, universal basic income seems actually kind of probable. Okay, so they're going to pay people to stay inside and live in the metaverse and not question. Okay, so how are they going to afford that? Because we're already at a 130% debt to GDP ratio as a nation. We just keep printing. The only answer is technology and artificial intelligence. So they are all in on this. And my thing is, you got to know the rules of the game.
Yes.
You can't change where things are headed. You can be aware of them. You can position yourself. And this is where it will come full circle now to why we landed on investing for wealth creation and then living life in the private. Because if you do those two things in 5-10 years, you're going to have a level of money to where you don't need to ever worry about money again. Doesn't matter how many kids you have. We're talking about generational amounts of wealth, because it would be the equivalent of if you invested in the Ford automobile in 1921,
right,
and I talked to you in 1945. It's one of the biggest companies ever at that time, right?
Yeah.
It revolutionized because it became something that every single person used. And we're seeing that in a similar way with the game that Tesla is playing. We'll see how it plays out. But that's how I look at these technologies. So I know I'm talking about a lot, but it's just because crypto just so happens to fit in the buckets that I'm talking about. I was never some evangelist of crypto. I actually didn't even invest in it until 2020.
Got it.
I knew of it and still didn't invest in it because it wasn't there yet for me.
Yeah.
I'm like I have a checklist, I'm looking for certain things. Then it hit that point. And so now it's like, okay, hyperinflation, decline of the US as a world reserve currency. I mean, when you study past inflation or currency collapses like the Weimar Republic and such, and you see this right now in Venezuela. You see this in a few different countries. Bitcoin is their is their reserve currency. And when you earn your paycheck, they immediately transfer it and convert it into Bitcoin, because if they don't, in a matter of weeks or months, their currency will have been taken from them because the inflation is so large. Now that's like a very forward looking what the US is heading towards if things don't change, where the inflation percentage isn't 6%, it's 80.
Yes.
Like that, so hopefully, I'm not saying we'll get there. I don't know. Hopefully we're not that stupid. I don't know. But
I don't know if we're stupid or just asleep in terms of
yes.
the mass swath of humanity. For looking at the time now, and just kind of feeling into, we might begin to wrap up. What I would love to know is, there's going to be one additional question beyond this, besides how do we reach you and what would be some next steps with you. But speaking of next steps, one of the things that I learned through you and Aaron Apke on the Great Awakening podcast, and also listening to so many episodes of yours on the Conscious Wealth podcast, is, and by the way, all this is on YouTube too. So for those of you who love to watch, it's there, was learning the distinction between investing in, let's just say, the cryptos, the blockchains, and the Bitcoins, because we're on this topic right now, but I'm fully aware that there's a lot more to this picture, which is what you're trying to paint. So thank you for that. And it's, if you go and buy from like the Coinbases and the CoinGeckos and all of that, you don't actually own that.
Yes.
and it can be taken from you, and it will most likely, because that's just the nature of where things are headed, for you not to own anything. And so can we speak about, and I know you're not giving financial advice, but whatever you feel called to share around how to advise, how to recommend or share, I'm very careful about my language here, of where people might begin, but then the importance of moving their investments into their own personal ledger and or private wallet.
Yes. Great topic. Okay. So in crypto, there's a saying that we use: not your keys, not your crypto. And what that refers to is when you buy or own a hardware wallet, which is what I'm going to get to in a second. That's the type of wallet that we use to store our crypto safely, like actually where you control it and it is yours. It gives you a key that you have to, a very advanced encrypted passcode that, would be very difficult to hack. So it's just a saying in the space. But basically what it alludes to is a lot of beginners might go on Coinbase or crypto.com or KuCoin or Gemini. There's a million. And let's say you buy your first Bitcoin and then you're stoked and then you buy it and then you just, go on with your life. Well, just like when you put your money in a bank, what happens? Whose money is that?
Is there any money?
Yeah. So if you put your money in a bank and the bank goes insolvent, of course, hopefully you have FDIC insurance, but that's not the bank paying you back. That's this relationship they have with the FDIC, and hopefully you get reimbursed. But in general, as you see, if you study history of bank runs and stuff, that's not your money. And you'll see that in the fine print. Well, brokerages, which is what it's called, where you can buy stocks or buy crypto, it's called a brokerage. That's just really like a derivative of a bank. Mm-hmm. They sell securities. They're a middleman of securities, and they take like cents per whatever. Similar to how credit card companies are a middleman and they take cents. It's very similar. But they also have bank type properties. Like Robinhood is a very popular app for at least younger people to like trade options, and it kind of feels like a video game, but you're losing all your money before you know it, but it just took you over. And so a lot of people may be familiar with Robinhood. Well, they recently initiated a campaign where if you hold your money on there, you get 4.5% APY just on your cash that's sitting there. And so I guess I just say that to illustrate that these are literally kind of banks in a way. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to crypto, if you leave your cryptocurrency on the brokerage, and let's say Coinbase gets hacked, right, or just like Binance, this isn't a theory, it's happened. Binance goes insolvent or whatever it may be, you find out that the CEO, because remember, crypto is highly unregulated. That's part of what they use to say like, oh, we can't let this become a thing because it's for criminals and money launderers. And it's like, now that's like 1% of who uses crypto, but they just make it seem like that's all that it is. But there are bad actors. I've lost multiple six figures on what you would call a rug pull. But that's how you earn your stripes in the crypto space, right? Where you're fully invested in this coin and it appreciates immensely. And you're like, all right, I'm in this for the long term. The founder's great. The community's great. The team's great. The technology's great. And one day you check the chart and it's down 99% in a day. And you're like, what the fuck is happening? And then you start seeing news on Twitter that the founder, it was actually using a fake name, has fled to Singapore, drained the funds, and was actually a con artist. And this is like, he waited 3 years to do that type thing. So that's, crypto can be a wild place. And so for some people, they just don't even get into it. But Bitcoin is not crypto. Like Bitcoin and Ethereum are like, that's more like investing in the S&P. Like, not everyone wants to find these rare 100x opportunities in the stock market of these, new unicorns that are high risk, high reward. Like, I totally understand that. But investing in the S&P is a different story, right? So same with crypto. You can invest in smaller cap, market cap, meaning smaller total size opportunities that might 100x, but also they might go to zero. And there's a real probability of that. We tend to stay away from those things. But things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, I mean, the largest holders is the very system and the institutions that have been running shit. So that should tell you about the direction things are going, right? Like they would not have adopted it if they didn't have to, believe me. Exactly. Right? It became a game theory thing where they're like, fuck it. We have to get in. Like we have to be first, or it's going to happen no matter what. So that's, but yeah, just to wrap up, like if and when you dabble in crypto and you start exploring it, let's say you decide to buy some, once the purchase is complete, now this is going to be different for Coinbase because Coinbase sometimes will hold your funds like 5 days before the debit clears or whatever from your bank account. But you'll get an email about that. But once it is available to send, you want to buy yourself what is called a cold wallet. Now there's a variety of different cold storage wallet. There's a variety of different types. But in general, you can look into like the Ledger, or there's the Trezor, or there's more advanced ones like the Grid Plus, or there's one other ones if you wanted to get more serious about encryption. But the point is, it's this tiny ass device, and you could be a billionaire and fit it in your pocket. Now that alone is a value proposition, because in the past, your main option of store of value and protection from tyranny and the devaluation of your currency and your own government was gold.
Right.
Now, if you're a billionaire in gold, I want you to try to visualize
the amount
that takes,
storage you would
the
need.
security,
Uh-huh.
the personnel. That's a full operation to protect that.
Yep.
You're at that point, you're a sovereign nation. You need an actual military to protect.
Exactly. Yeah.
So now we have billionaires. They're called Michael Saylor. We have Bitcoin billionaires who is residing now. I would hope they're not that stupid to put it all on one ledger and such. I'm sure they have better security measures, splitting it up, etc. But theoretically, you could put that in your pocket and travel the world and no one would ever know. So it is not only a store of value and has all the same properties as gold and silver, a hedge against inflation, right?
Right.
Something that maintains value over time, something that has inherent scarcity, even more so than gold and silver, because gold and silver can actually continue to be mined, even though that's never talked about for some reason. We act like there's a set amount. There's not a set amount.
Right.
But there is actually only 21 million Bitcoin that can and will ever be in creation. And as soon as all those are mined, that's it. Yeah. The only way you'll be able to buy Bitcoin in the future is from me selling it to you. And if I don't want to sell it to you, then what's the price going to be of that? Right. The price has to get so high that someone is willing to sell it. And if everyone knows, well, shit, I'm not selling it. You're not selling it. Right, then that's going to be an astronomical price. Right. So, yeah, it's worth looking into as an asset class. Once again, I don't have all of my eggs in that basket. I have friends who are what you call Bitcoin maxis, meaning 100% of their net worth is in Bitcoin. I have friends who don't believe in Bitcoin and they're all into altcoins, which are the other ones. I have friends who are only in stock. Like for me, it's like, these are all religions. I try to not be dogmatic, right? I already came from religion.
Yep.
I don't need more religions. I see value in it all.
Do you have, are you invested in gold and silver?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we teach that as a percentage, required percentage of our recommended allocation in the LUC.
Beautiful. So the distinction that I wanted to make that I learned from you in on the Great Awakening podcast and your Conscious Wealth podcast is what I had mentioned earlier, but I really don't want to gloss over this because this, I like sat up and I was like, you had my attention. I hadn't heard that before. And I was so grateful to hear it. And I was like, I got to get this cold storage wallet thing. And it was, you don't own it if it's on one of those other platforms, right? Yep. And so you do own it though if you take it off of that and through your pass key and all that encryption, which you had mentioned. There's some other advanced ways to things to buy. Do you recommend the ledger?
For the average person, yes.
Okay, because that's where I am currently, but I imagine the deeper I get into it, I imagine.
Yeah, so unless you have, I'd say if you have like 7 figures or larger, maybe would consider a little bit higher one. But
yeah, definitely not there.
That's just me being like next level because we have, 200 plus students and I feel responsible. And so I want to recommend the best of the best for them. But also another option is like just have multiple.
Yes, I love that.
So instead of like just play out, you just want to play out worst case scenarios, right? So instead of it's been lost or stolen and my life is ruined now, it's all right, that sucks, but it was only 1/3.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to point out in case it's not obvious because it wasn't to me in the beginning is that if you lose the little, it looks like a thumb drive, right? If you lose that cold storage wallet,
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right? Because that's what I was like. When I moved from LA into Austin, I was like, where's the cold storage wallet? And then finally a friend who's helping me learn this, he was like, do you have your passkey? He's like, me, my mother, my sister, like everyone's got that wherever they are, right? And that's also what I would recommend is people that you truly trust, is to make sure that you're not the only one who has that passkey, right? But God, this has been so incredibly educational and inspiring, by the way, because there is so much. The reason I love the Great Awakening podcast and you and Aaron are such the perfect dynamic duo is because you're not afraid to really touch on the darkest, hardest, grittiest, uncomfortable topics about what is happening, but you paint it through a lens of it doesn't feel woo and ungrounded or impractical. It's like you can look at it that way. You truther community, I get it. Everything's controlled up. Everything, everything is going to be the greatest psyop. Or you can look at this as opportunity. Right, it's all a psyop. Everything. Don't trust anyone. Am I even human? Oh my god! And lately, I've gotten into the true earth conversation, and I'm like, oh, this is just too much. I just need to just backtrack a little bit, maintain my connection with God. That's what I know is real. And then from there, when I'm clean and clear and calm, that creates a consciousness in my reality, my lens of perception, because that's really all it is. Of I will know what to do, right? Or I'll know how to ask, just like going into the journey space. Is it in my highest and best in this life to teach the sovereignty space? And it was like, you don't do life that way anymore, right? That's a heavier topic. But then there's all these other things that me, my listeners, and my viewers and our community, we're awakening to, and there's so much coming at us. And so it's just so incredibly special to have resources like you that have dedicated your life since 16 years old of really studying, really researching, being so clean in your integrity around how you teach and what it all means and what it's attached to and what it isn't. And, that we can learn from you. So from the deepest place in my heart, I just want to say thank you. I get emotional. My gratitude is just so rich and so palpable, but I really mean it. Like, you're setting so many of us up to get ourselves free in a really real way that's beyond ourselves. It's generational. And so I just want to say thank you. And my last question, besides where would we find you and connect with you, is there anything that you wish you would have been asked that you would like to share?
I think the only thing that's coming up is for those listening to this who may feel like they just had their head blown off. None of this external stuff matters if you don't love yourself.
Mm.
And I think you're the perfect embodiment of that.
Mm.
And so while we talked a lot about external stuff, and like I said, it's a fun game that I like to play. It is a game. And what dictates whether that game is for you or not and how good you'll do at that game is where you're at internally. So, my journey was a long, drawn out one. Even to explain it, it's a whole
It was a
whole journey every time I go on a podcast. But I explain all that because the wealth came last.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And it was years of letting go of things that I thought I was that I wasn't, forgiving myself, and accessing, once all of it falls away, like realizing, oh, I don't need to become anything. It was a journey of letting go, coming back to what you already were. And I think that's coming through because, I've been doing this for long enough to know that money has a very stimulating energy. It feels like dopamine. It feels like, oh, I want to do, or, oh, I have FOMO, or whatever. I'm going to judge myself because I'm not there, right, or whatever. And it's like, for your audience, the wealth can only come in when you're ready for it. And this message today was either for you or it's not. That's not to say in absolutes it's not, right? But just for where you're at right now. And that's something that, only each of you know in your heart. So that's what I'll say. Like, I know your views on social media and I share the same ones, and it's just like, for those that are going to look at my content and stuff, don't there's no need to get wrapped up in like, I want to be there. I wish I was there. I've walked a certain path to get here, and it's been a 12-year path. And I didn't have much to show for myself even 6 years in. So yeah, I've just really had to learn that, like with trying to find mentors or trying to obtain information or anything that has to do with something outside of me. It's usually has brought up for me that I'm not enough, that I'm not, I just wish I was blank. Need to be better here. Need to be more. And this like level of like wealth and embodiment, which is really the actual gem, is the embodiment. The wealth is just a scorecard. That wasn't able to come through until I actually came to a knowing of like, none of that exists outside of me. Wealth has to be something that it's not a becoming.
Yeah.
You have to let all else fall away. And that's hard in this world. You know, it's so busy. There's so many opinions, so many voices and perspectives, but even mine, I guess that's why I'm saying that, like even mine, maybe it's not for you. All that matters is yours. And I'm sharing as untainted as I can, though, you know, it's never perfect. Some of where my guidance has guided me, but that's different for everyone. So some people resonate, some people don't. But I think that's the highest wish that I would have for anyone listening today. Is just, you know, it's about your journey and your guidance and your own remembering.
That's it. Oh, so beautifully said. That's the word that kept coming through as you were saying. It's not about the becoming, it's the letting go. And I was like, yeah, it's a deep remembrance. Whew. Ah, I feel so full. Like my heart is so full. My
Feels
mind
like we just had a little journey.
Yeah, I feel like it was a
medicine
shamanic journey. Because I thought we'd be in and out in an hour, and I had no idea. And
I didn't.
I had no idea. But I'm just so grateful that we allowed this to flow. It was deep medicine, and it's so symbolic of where I thought we would go, which is where I believe the masses are too. And I'll put myself there because this is a newer space for me. And let's just talk about crypto and Bitcoin. Let's do an introductory on that. And you're like, you and your integrity, you're like, yeah, let's give some context and texture. Let's settle into this and let's, come into it in a beautiful shamanic path, really is what this was. And it really was, right? Because
yeah,
we went into the belly of the beast of fear and shadow and scarcity and disembodiment and all of that. And we come out just where it all began, the truth of who we really are before any of this external stuff even mattered, or we were, deemed valuable in the world or worthy in the world based on these things. That if we can know it, this is the whole premise of Fire and Soul. We can know that for ourselves in our everyday life, and let life be the living ceremony that it really is, to be the catalyst, right? Aaron talks about that, for us to integrate deeper into our remembrance and to our forgiveness in our hearts and to living with our hearts wide open. And this is part of that path. And so I just feel so grateful, as I have shared. For those who feel called to want to know more about your work and possibly even get connected with Jax, your wife, and learn about the Level Up Collective, where is the best place to reach you?
You guys can go to J Griff, that's JGRIFF.org/LUC. And that's the Level Up Collective initials.
Yeah, I love
to learn
that.
more.
Beautiful. And I'll be very clear. I believe I'll be in that community very shortly. And The only reason I'm not right now is because I just joined something else and I want to manage my time properly.
Smart
Um,
choice.
yeah. And I am not an affiliate and I have not asked to be an affiliate. It's not anything I was looking for. I just want to continue to share and pay it forward in any way possible. Some of you will absolutely be snagged. I have a friend who is in there and loving it. And so I know you take very good care of your people. And what I think really inspired me just to do a little, not that we need a plug for you, you got plenty of business. However, this is a deeper mission. It's a way deeper mission. And I see how activated you are in answering that call. And it's that I started to notice the people that were in your community, and they're people that I follow and admire deeply, right? Very embodied in their transformations, in their rhetoric, right? It's like they're living it. And I was like, wow, that person. And they're people that I have through my own discernment and my own embodiment could recognize, like, yeah, that's real, right? And so I was like, oh, okay, I get it. There is a community that's bubbling up in a lot of different areas of life. And I was like, these are my people, right? And so this
Mm.
is why I feel so excited to bring people like you on this show, because we're just deepening into our divine alignment, holistically looking at our lives and ways in which we can all level up through a deep remembrance of who we really are. So thank you again, my friend.
You just gave me chills saying that. Thank you. It's a fucking honor. It's truly an honor. That's all I can say. God is great.
God is great. Oh.